All right, good evening. Welcome to the Braintree Planning Board meeting for November 14th. Our meeting tonight starts at 7 o'clock. We do have a full board tonight. And as we usually do, we'll start with our old new business before moving into our public hearings at 7:15. So first up at the 7 p.m. Old new business, the meeting schedule. Director Santucci-Razzi, do you want to speak on that?
Yes, I'd like to. Louise put together the schedule of dates. Let me just open mine up here, if you can bear with me for a minute. And I did hear from Member Conley. She did have a conflict on August, which we will note. Sorry, bear with me, folks. I just sent it to everybody yesterday. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Madam Chair. So typical second Tuesday, we don't change much around here. I haven't had a chance to look at the deadlines and things. We might revise those just a little bit. We hit a holiday here or there. We usually give ourselves a little bit of extra time in those scenarios. But the dates are the standard second Tuesday, and we double check those. Louise checks them against any holiday schedules, including the Jewish holidays as well, because a lot of those start at sundown the night before. So we try to be cautious of that. And again, just noting, Member Conley can't make August, but now we have 5 members and an alternate, so that shouldn't be an issue.
Okay. All right. Is there any other members of the board that have any questions or comments, conflicts on the schedule? Yes.
I did not realize you needed to know right away. On the May meeting, the 14th, I have a conflict.
Okay.
That was May.
The May 14th one. Yep.
And we don't need to know now. We typically, as things change, vacations come up, life happens, we just ask that people, when you do know, and if you do, another conflict presents itself, to just shoot us an email, and we just make a note in the book so that we know.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So with that, I'd just be looking for a motion to approve the 2024 meeting schedule.
Sure.
I make a motion to approve it.
All right. We have a motion by Member Storlazzi. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Grove. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right. And next on our list are the updates, the master plan. The next master plan steering committee meeting is November 16th. Director Santucci-Razzi, do you want to fill in on the updates on that?
Sure. So this is going to be our last and final master plan steering committee meeting. We have been at this for the better part of the last 2 years. The draft plan, as noted previously, is up on the website, master plan website, along with the outreach matrix and some key information that we gathered from our public outreach throughout the 2 years that we've been at this. The Master Plan Steering Committee will meet on Thursday, and one of their items on the agenda is to vote to recommend the plan and send the plan to the Planning Board. So what will happen in December is Jen Goldson, our master plan consultant, will come to the Planning Board's December 12th meeting and provide a brief presentation on the plan. And then the Planning Board is the board and the regulatory authority that is tasked under the Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter, I think it's Chapter 41, Section 81D. I know the section's right, with adopting the plan for the community. So I would encourage members to take a look at that, reach out with any questions that they might have, but we will have that on December as an agenda item.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Member Kent is our planning board correspondence. Member Kent, do you have anything you want to add?
It's been a long process. It's good to see that it's just about wrapping up.
All right, great, thank you. Okay. All right, and the next item for our update list is the MBTA Community Zoning Overlay. And Director Santucci-Razzi, do you want to give an update on where we are?
Sure, as we move from one massive undertaking to another massive undertaking. Yes, I'd love to, through the chair. So I've been drafting away, mapping away over the last couple months or so our bylaw text amendments in the form of overlay districts, including the overlay maps. That was filed with the town council last Wednesday. First abutter notification was in the Patriot Ledger on November 11th. The second one will run on November 18th. We also put together 4 separate abutter notifications that were mailed out yesterday to all the abutters within the various districts, overlay districts. And those were a little bit more than our typical legal notice, which can be very dry unless you're versed with general law sections and things like that. So to meet the statutory notice requirements, we did include the actual legal notice in there. We included on several locations the link to the website, which all of the materials that were filed with the town council were put up immediately last week on the town's website. And then we also included a little blurb in the beginning, why are you getting this notice, that Braintree is a rapid transit community, and that we are doing these zoning overlays per the compliance guidelines issued by, I'm going to still call them DHCD, Office of Healthy Living Communities. And then on the back side, depending on which district was getting that mailer, we included the acreage of that overlay district as well as a map showing the parcels in that. So just wanted to give residents and parties of interest a little more information than your typical meeting notice. We found the maps to be helpful. At least people can see the areas that are highlighted and find their street and see where they are in proximity to these. We also explained in the letter you're receiving this because you're either a property in that one of those districts or you are an abutter, party of interest, noticed party of interest to one of those districts. Because we do get a lot of calls, why did I get this? Why are you sending this? On planning board notices, zoning board, we get calls like that all the time. So I will be putting together, in advance of the meeting, my presentation that I'll be doing that evening, and I will highlight a little bit about the 3A, the section of the general laws, and a little bit about the guidelines, and then obviously present the various overlays. I would welcome any planning board members that have any questions to reach out, available to meet with anybody, go over the maps, go over the text, concerns, positive, negative, whatever it might be, available in advance of the public hearing if needed, or any time after that as well.
Okay, thank you. And I know the 3A requirements have for the rapid transit communities such as Braintree a requirement to remain in compliance that the zoning get approved by the end of the year. So one thought that I had was, considering that our first meeting is November 28th, that if there's members of the public who have comments or questions, that to the extent they can submit those in advance in writing so that we have a better opportunity to review and respond and understand those comments prior to the meeting, since there's little time to get it moved through planning board and town council prior to the end of the year. Then I would say that the more written comments, I think the better, as far as trying to respond and understand what those are. It's not clearly a formal hearing for right now. It's just a discussion point, but are there any other members that have logistical questions or questions with the upcoming meeting on that? Member McCamey.
Thank you. The only question I have is, why did the MBTA wait so long to put this in place? I mean, the T's been running for a long time, and we're only now starting to think about, oh, let's make sure we have housing around transit. In case you know, or maybe the chair knows.
Yeah, if I could answer for the MBTA, I probably wouldn't be sitting here tonight, but I can't answer that question. I mean, Connor and I have been on a lot of different webinars and technical sessions, and, you know, it's just, there's a lot of information and messaging coming from various state organizations, various housing groups. CHAPA is one of them. We actually downloaded, and I can share that with the board members. They've provided some different technical resources as to, you know, different things that you want to talk about in your communities. And it's all essentially related to, you know, equity and really that the production of multifamily housing is not really at the pace that it needs to be at. And I think that other tools that the state laid out, I'll reference, you know, Chapter 40B and comprehensive permits, that process, I think, and how the state laid that out in the 70s, that is just a mess. And it ends up just honestly, in my experience, has just been never-ending litigation. And that's really not producing housing units. So something that is a local tool that is by right, required to be by right in your ordinance, is probably something that the state's been thinking about for a while, giving us obviously a little bit more control with being able to write our zoning versus in a comprehensive permit situation, you kind of, whatever you get, and you're tasked with granting waivers from your bylaw. So that's basically sort of my take on it. And to the chair's point, in the flyer, I did include a line, email, questions and comments, and included my email address as well, and I will compile those, typically how we've had on other projects where we've received a large volume of public comment, and we'll provide all of those to the members and post everything to the web as well.
Thank you. Member Kent? Member Grove?
Can the 15 units per acre be affected by the vertical construction?
No. Meaning, can you go less than that or above that, or?
Because if I go up, I can have more units in a given space.
So, and I don't want to get too in, because it's, you know, but basically the state has a compliance model, and you're required to input all your zoning parameters: height, lot coverage, setbacks, density, lot size, and then this compliance model spits out a number based on those parameters and tells you you either comply or you don't comply. So that's how we tested the zoning parameters.
How do we know when this model is changed? My problem with this law right now is that it doesn't give any minimum standard for construction, or it doesn't tell you how it's being calculated. You're supposed to hit a moving target.
I'm not sure I follow that.
I think to the director's
Yeah, I don't want to get.
point earlier on the specifics of the zoning, so the law has a broad requirement of what the towns need to do to stay in compliance, and then the towns write the zoning. And so I think the substance of that zoning that's been drafted by the town will be more of a discussion point for the November 28th meeting, when it's fully vetted as the public hearing process.
Okay.
But I do understand there has been changed guidelines, and there's been different things that have come out, and it does feel very different from most other requirements. Member Strelazzi? Member Conley?
Yes, thank you. Question for the director. Have you had initial feedback from the community?
We went to a couple community planning meetings early on. I couldn't tell you the dates, and there was very few members of the public at those meetings.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. And now bringing us to beyond 7:15, we can move into the continued public hearings. So these are public hearings where there's an opportunity for the public to comment with questions, and that will be after the initial presentations. But we'll start with 42 Bergoli Lane, which is Planning Board File 2308. And Assistant Director, would you like to give an update on where we're at with this one?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if I may, through the chair to the board, staff has prepared draft findings and conditions which are reflective, or the revised plans that were submitted yesterday by the applicant and their representatives. The applicant did quantify the amount of trees removed within the buffer to the open space conservancy zone. They have planted more than a 1-to-1 ratio as outlined in their landscaping plan. The findings prepared and the conditions prepared speak to those plans and materials submitted. Staff is recommending favorable action on this application at this time. Staff would like the applicant to present the details of those plans to the board as well.
Great, thank you. Good.
Man from Hardy Plusman Design Group, located at 1285 Washington Street in Weymouth. I'm just going to do a quick recap and get everyone up to speed. Since you only looked at the plan before, I'm not going to go into details. Again, we are asking for a special permit for the building, the proposed building at Bergoli Lane to be, waiver for a portion of the open space requirement because of the difficult terrains and the lot shape that restrict the development area that's available on this lot. What we have done from the last revisions on the original plan submitted, we have revised the site plan basically to address the DPW comments. There are a number of comments related to sewer and water connections to the site, and also the comments that we have to go to get a stormwater permit. So we add notes on the plans that they are required to go to get a stormwater permit, and also we design the sewer and water connections. As far as the landscaping plan, we have submitted a landscaping plan. On the last submittals, we quantified 19 trees being removed from the open space buffer area. And the new plans, we have added 6 more red maples. So a little bit more than the 1-to-1 ratio that was presented on the last meeting. And one of the comments we have had from Mr. McCarmy was that how big is the building, what's the square footage of the building. And unfortunately, I didn't have that number last time, but we've gone back and measured up the architectural plans. Again, the deed restriction on this lot is to have a minimum 3,200 square foot of living area, exclusion of garage and basement and then mechanical space. As measured from the architectural plan that was submitted with the application, there's approximately 3,290 square foot. So the building itself is designed to the minimum of what is required. We are not trying to build a huge buildings placed on this lot. So just to clarify that. And other than that, I'm open to any questions that the board may have.
Okay, thank you for the updated information. Member McCamey?
Thank you. So if the building's 3290,
Yes.
and then you're required to add a garage and whatever else, what is the total square footage of all the of the residents?
It's a 2-car garage, so
Okay.
I think the typical car garage is 20 by 20 or so, so it's about 400 square feet roughly. So that's addition to the 32, which doesn't count the basement.
Oh, there's no basement.
Yeah, well, there is basement, but it's not counting the basement. Basement is pretty much, I believe it's storage space at this point.
Okay. And I guess I'd ask the assistant director, so last time we talked about the conflict between, you know, what the developer originally wanted and then Braintree regulations. Are we, in terms of just looking at from the Braintree regulation standpoint, are we okay?
From a regulation standpoint, yes, they meet the dimensional criteria, and then obviously their application submitted and revised materials have assisted in trying to issue the special permit for the buffer area, where a portion of the structure, the patio area, and the revegetation is. So the deed, you know, the deed restriction they placed on the property really holds no weight in what we grant. It's a private matter, you know, we didn't put it on there. However, we are looking at this for the buffer and how they're utilizing the buffer, and they have submitted plans that show what the usable area of the lot is without going into the buffer, and it's quite arguably just a square box, whereas some of the homes along Bergoli Lane are rectangles in nature. They have the living portions with the garages on the right or left side, which matches the style that the applicant's proposing.
Okay, and obviously this is the first time I've ever heard of something like this, you know, the deed restriction. I can't imagine that we would allow that in other developments, or maybe there are some outstanding already.
If I may, through the chair, it's actually more common than you think, Member McCamey.
really?
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
developer's covenant, and we've seen it before. We see it in subdivisions because they want all of the homes to be somewhat comparable from an appearance, from a size, from a sales comp, things like that. So if you look at some of the newer subdivisions, two stand out. I don't think there was a developer covenant on Dell's Way, but those
Yeah.
are all, you know, nice size homes, well situated on the properties. And the other one that stands out to me was the Oregon Ave extension. And the McGraths had a development covenant on that one as well. Theirs was even more, they had like a minimum 3-bay garage and things were, you know, some of the things are, you know, make sense, and then some of them get a little bit, in that particular case, people were struggling with fitting that, and a lot of them ended up doing this like side garage door because they just couldn't physically fit a 3-car wide. So it's more common than you think. We're typically not involved in it. But it's to sort of maintain the look, the feel, and the, you know, the sort of the caliper of a subdivision.
Right. But the key here is that this project meets Braintree requirements. Dimensional aspect. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Member McCamey. Member Kent?
I was covered by Member McCamey, which is not unusual. Thank you. I'm all set.
All right, Member Grove?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Member Stolazzi?
I just have a quick one. Have you submitted your proposed lighting? As I can see from the drawing, the house is, I guess I'd say sideways compared to the other houses, so is the lighting going to have any bearing on the neighbors, or has that been already addressed where it's minimal lighting and?
Yeah, we have not submitted. I think that's one of the conditions of approval. We are supposed to submit the lighting prior to constructions, I believe. And the lighting is going to be residential style, very, you know, not like 20 foot, but, you know, probably
Like
like
no
5, 6
main-
feet.
No main spotlights shining into the other family?
No, no,
Disrupting
no.
or anything? Okay. Thank you. No other comments?
Thank you. Member Conley?
No, thank you.
Thank you. And my only question is whether you've had a chance to take a look at the draft conditions, if you had any questions or comments.
Yes, we do have a few questions. I can go through them.
Okay.
I believe this is So actually, the lighting is the first one, which is under item. Like the staff review analysis. The question is, we are supposed to submit the lighting requirement, but when are we supposed to submit that? Prior to start of work. Okay. Then-
And did you have any?
And-
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And also the lighting, I think is, you just answered on the conditions, is the timing on the conditions, so I think we clarified that. And on the conditions, page 4, I think it's number 4, the guarantee surety bond, I just have a comment that's not applicable, just to confirm that's not applicable. And so number 29, I think the let's talk about all delivery material, products, equipment, and trucks associated with this authorized activities shall be adhered to the engineering report date September 11, 2023. There shall be no parking, idling, stack of any type of vehicle associated with the authorized activities on Plain Street and Bergoli Lane or in any public and private way in the town of Braintree. I think that's more boilerplate for like a grading permit. I think, you know, we are going to have some construction vehicle on Bergoli Lane. I can't imagine any on Plain Street. But
Of course.
Not, they will be utilizing Liberty to Plain or through John Mahar Highway up to Plain as well. Hence the reason as to why we kept Plain Street in that condition. And given there's a significant amount of grading work that has to occur on the site, I don't know the timeline of the grading activity or what's proposed, but we do want to make sure that, you know, there aren't trucks stacked along Bergoli Lane as this work occurs.
well, Plain Street is fine. We don't anticipate, but there are going to be trucks on Bergoli Lane, which is the roadway we access to the site. So maybe we can strike out Bergoli Lane.
What
on
if
this
there
item.
was an addition on there that just said, without prior authorization, you know, as long as you let the assistant director know when the trucks might come and any arrangements can be made to protect abutters, would that be something that works?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if the applicant submits a memo to the department highlighting
Okay.
the construction schedule and such. Yep.
Okay. Now, were there any other questions on the draft conditions?
So 31, I think that's, it's talk about net fill, but I think that's supposed to be net cut. And I think that's just one more item. Number 38, prior to start of vertical construction of the single-family dwelling, or the applicant shall install the stormwater improvement as depicted within the record set of plans. I think the timing is a little challenging because we're trying to complete this basically by May. So the stormwater system is right at the toes of the slope, which is at the driveway. So we are going to be phasing and that insulation, but we're trying to keep material going up to the building site. So,
Would prior to a certificate of occupancy be acceptable?
excuse me?
Prior to the issuance of certificate of occupancy?
I
Or
think
as-built
prior
approval?
to the occupancy permit, I think that's reasonable. It is going to be ongoing on the drainage improvement works. We
Okay.
have to phase it, shift it back and forth to get material access to the building site.
Okay, then I would recommend prior to as-built approval.
Okay.
That's acceptable.
Okay,
Okay.
and that's it.
Okay, great, thank you. And this is a public hearing. Is there anybody here on 42 Bergoli Lane? Okay, not a big surprise there. Okay, so with that, so I would be looking for a motion to enter the correspondence into the record.
I make a motion to enter the correspondence into the record?
All right.
Second.
Motion by Member Esterlazzi, second by Member Grove. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. And that's, I should clarify that the voting members for this application are myself, Member McCamey, Grove, Kent, and Esterlazzi. And so now I'll be looking for a motion to close the public hearing.
So move.
All right, motion by Member Kent,
Second.
second by Member Grove. All those in favor? Aye. All right, and then be looking for a motion on the application itself.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we accept the special permit site plan review for 42 Bergoli Lane, Planning Board File 23-08, with the conditions as laid out by the staff.
Second.
And before you second, real quick, and changes discussed on the record?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great.
Second.
Second by Member Grove, motion was by Member McCamey. Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you very much.
Very much.
Okay, so up next is 116 Lundquist Drive. Okay, all right, and so again, this is a public hearing. It's 116 Lundquist Drive, Planning Board File 2307. Assistant Director Murphy, do you want to give us an update on this one?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and to the board, as well as the applicant. Staff had the proposed stormwater system peer-reviewed by Strong Point Engineering, who is present tonight, and able to speak to the peer review report dated November 10th that was prepared for this application. Staff at this point is recommending a continuance to the December meeting, and given that there aren't too many significant or altering comments made within the report, staff is of the opinion that these issues can be addressed by the applicant with permission to draft findings and conditions for the December meeting.
Okay, thank you. We'll hear from the applicant.
Yes, good evening, Chairperson Croha, members of the Planning Board, Frank Marinelli for the record. I'm pleased to appear before the board on behalf of Oliver Street Capital and their property 116 Lundquist Drive. The property is, as we covered the last time, first of all, with me is John Adair, who's the director of Oliver Street Capital. By way of background, the property is 4.54 acres, located in a 1960s industrial park. It's in the commercial zoning district with watershed overlay. The property has an approximate 42,000 square foot building that was constructed in 1967, so over 45 years ago. This is the type of improvement, as the assistant director pointed out, that we like to see in these types of 1960s industrial parks. This is an improvement of the stormwater system, and also we have to the westerly part of the site, there is a hard-packed gravel area, and we're taking that area and we are paving it and installing new stormwater treatment. So that area is approximately 50,220 square feet. There's no modern stormwater management system, treatment or controls, and the proposal is to pave that pre-existing gravel packed area, install a state-of-the-art stormwater management and treatment system that complies with DEP stormwater management standards and best practices. All in all, it will be a neater truck storage and equipment storage area than currently exists, and will also protect the interests of the watershed overlay district with the new stormwater controls, infrastructure, and treatment. So we also have gone to the zoning board, which we reported last time, and we have less lot coverage, as we showed on that composite exhibit that we had, than 13 out of the 17 surrounding properties in the industrial area. So our lot coverage is 74%. Our open space is up to 26%, which we increased from 23% with this project. That's all good, and normally in the commercial area you can cover 75% of the lot. We're still below that. It's the watershed that was adopted in '82, pretty much years after this site was used as compact area and storage and so forth. So we did go to the zoning board. We did get that relief anyway, even if there was pre-existing rights. The fact that 60% is the new dimension in that area for lot coverage, and 40% open space. And in getting that relief, we're still superior in terms of open space and minimizing the lot coverage to the extent possible. So I know that we had a call last week with Nick Fasendola. Nick is the project engineer from Level Design. We had a Teams call with the assistant planning director, and also Eric Dias, who's here. Eric is from Strong Point, as Mr. Murphy pointed out. We had a good call and a good understanding as to what the engineers are going to address, and at this point, I think maybe it's appropriate for Eric or Nick to discuss what the peer review has determined. I know that Eric issued a letter last week, and as I said, we had the Teams call, so maybe he can go first, point that out, if you think that's the way to
have a discussion about our preliminary findings, and then after that we did issue a letter. There was, there's not time between then and now for them to have made a lot of these changes, but what I will say is that a lot of the things in the letter are questions or minor typos and things like that. There's just a couple of items that I think it makes sense to make the board aware of at this point. One of those being that the proposed system, subsurface system, is within the 4-foot separation to groundwater that requires a groundwater mounting analysis. The report indicates that they've done it and that the results are favorable. It was just omitted from the report, so they're going to submit that. We'll take a look at it and just get that hashed out. The other thing is that, the proposed system ties into the existing system on site. So we're just recommending as a condition of approval that that existing system be camera inspected, and the results either provided to the town or the town there to witness it, with the thought just being that if there is a deficiency somewhere else in that existing system, when you already have equipment mobilized to the site, now's the time to tear it up and change, replace a pipe or a structure or something like that if we need to. And just the last thing that I'll touch on, and it's something that I always defer to the board on for their preference. So the stormwater regulations require that test pits be advanced in the footprint of the stormwater infiltrative practice. It's very common that doesn't happen, because what happens from an engineering perspective is we go to the site, we dig holes to get a feel for what's going on, and then we ultimately end up siting the system somewhere else. That's what happened in this case. We do have one test pit that's in very close proximity to the system. So I think the board would have a choice to either require additional test pits now, or to defer and have them done as a confirmatory measure, possibly as a condition of any approval. I wouldn't expect on a site like this that we'd see a huge variation 20 or 50 feet apart from test pits, so I think that that could be reasonable. But again, I always do defer to the board on that. And really, those are the final points. I will say from a preliminary standpoint, the design looks good. I think it's a good improvement.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure.
While Mr. Dias is out there, any members have any questions for him? No? Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening. For the record, Nick Fasandola, from Level Design Group, the professional stamping engineer for this project. Just to echo on Eric's comments, we really don't have any objections to any of the items detailed in his letter. We would like to maintain our existing test pits, which are located in this area on the site. In that area there is the proposed subsurface infiltration system. As Mr. Dias stated, we don't anticipate any variation. The grade's very consistent throughout that level, so there's not going to be any huge variations in groundwater. The material is consistent from the two test pits, which are about 80 feet apart. So we're requesting that the board allow us to maintain those test pits with confirmatory inspections during the construction process. I always require that I do a bottom of hole inspection myself on any system that is being installed under my supervision, so I'll be out there doing inspections when this is constructed. We'll do one inspection once the hole is prepped and any unsuitable material is removed from the site, and then I'll do a second inspection when the stormwater system components are installed. We'll do an as-built survey before it's backfilled, just to confirm everything has been installed properly at that point. So we would like the board to consider allowing those two test pits. Other than that, there were no other items that we opposed, and we'll work on getting a comment response and revised plans within the next week or two to the board.
Great, thank you. Assistant Director Murphy, do you have any feedback on the test pit question?
We had discussed this, the director and myself, and we believe that a conditional test pit prior to the start of the authorized activity would be acceptable in this situation.
Thank you. And go to board comments first. Member McCamey, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Member Kent? No questions. Member Grove?
Oh, ma'am. Thank you.
Member Sterlesi?
No questions?
Member Conley?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I don't have any questions either. I don't see any issue with the later test pit confirmation. All right, so, and just the voting members on this are members McCamey, Kent, Grove, Sterlesi, and myself. And so we'll just be looking for a motion to continue to the December 12th hearing. Unless you have anything to add.
No, just that would be with draft conditions.
I think that's the intent with draft conditions in
Okay,
December.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So looking for a motion to continue.
So move.
Motion by member Kent,
Second.
second by member Grove. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you. All right. And we have up next is the continued public hearing on 125 Union Street. This application was started quite a bit before member Sterlesi joined us, so we're going to excuse his attendance for the rest of the evening. Thank you. Okay. You too. All right. So again, this is 125 Union Street, Planning Board File 2301, continued public hearing. We could get an update from Assistant Director Murphy on this application.
Yep, and if I may, through the chair, a couple updates. The applicant submitted revised materials on October 30th, and then subsequently submitted more revised materials last Thursday. The staff report does speak to the updated traffic materials that were submitted last Thursday. Essentially, the applicant has submitted a lot of the comments we've made as part of the site plan review process. There are some minor comments with relation to the architectural plan set. The applicant is currently working with the stormwater peer review consultant, Eric Diaz of Strong Point Engineering, on the proposed stormwater management system, and those efforts are ongoing as well. As it relates to the traffic, the applicant did submit demonstration of compliance with Article 14 with reference to the decreases in the level of service and the increase in volumes along the adjacent ways. Staff has noted throughout this analysis that there are levels of service decreases as depicted in the tables provided within the staff report and the applicant's revised materials. There are 3 increases in volumes as it relates to the Saturday peak traffic period, and those increases are above the 10%. Off the top of my head, they are Union Street between Ivory Street and the project site driveway at 11%, Union Street between the project site driveway and the Union Street rotary at 10.9%, Ivory Street between Union Street and the Ivory Street U-turn lane at 12.5%, which exceed the 10% that's allowed under Article 14. The formal staff recommendation on this, given that the peer review is still ongoing with respect to the stormwater as it relates to traffic, at this point in time, the planning board needs to make a determination as to whether the increases outside of the allowances under Article 14 are acceptable as cited within this report, even with the proposed mitigation, which the applicant has outlined in their memo dated November 9th, 2023, and the mitigation proposed can be outlined on page 4 of that report.
Thank you very much. All right, we hear from the applicant.
Yes, good evening, Frank Marinelli, pleased to appear on behalf of Torrington Properties. And Torrington, just by way of background, is a quality real estate developer and manager with a portfolio of over $500 million in development. With me is Pete Doucette. Pete is the project manager for Torrington and director of development. Also here is Greg DeBona and Joe Fonseca from Bowler Engineering, the project engineers. And also here is Jeff Dirk, who is our traffic engineer. Let me jump right to addressing something that the assistant planner said, and Jeff Dirk will speak to the board on the November 9th memos that were submitted that show compliance with Article 14. None of the decreases in level of service are an F, are any a failure. In fact, the report says that all of the, with the implementation of mitigative measures, the overall level of service at Union will be restored to no build conditions. And that's on page 4 of the memo that was filed on November 9th. And that none of the levels of service, it's important to note, with mitigation measures, no movements are predicted to operate at overcapacity. So I wanted to jump right to that, but also to cover the important points again on the development. Torrington is investing over $10 million in its acquisition and redevelopment of the site, of the former Motel 6 site. They're also investing approximately $1 million in the off-site mitigation at the Union, Grossman, and Ivory Street, installing several hundred feet of sidewalks, complete upgrading of the signalization at the intersection, turning lane on Ivory Street, and other improvements. They are transforming an eyesore at the entry of our town with uses by right under zoning, eliminating nonconformities, installing rich landscaping with over 650 plantings, The redevelopment itself is tremendous mitigation at Braintree's Gateway. The proposal, just by review, is 2 small buildings. One for Brookline Bank, 2,500 square feet, and one for Chick-fil-A, 5,225 square feet, a family restaurant and drive-through. The redevelopment program is less than 20% of the blighted building mass that currently exists on the site, which would be demolished when final redevelopment approvals are issued. In addition to over 650 plantings and complying with open space, the redevelopment also includes on-site drive-through stacking capacity of 55 to 60 vehicles, which exceeds on-site stacking capacity of any similar use that one can think of in the area. And so that kind of site characteristic is extremely appropriate for the proposed use, and has stated $1 million in off-site improvements that will have the existing intersection, as Jeff would tell you, and he said it in the memos, function better than under existing conditions. The zoning process is site plan review. Torrington's proposed tenants are 2 uses by right in the highway business zone, Chick-fil-A and Brookline Bank, both notable brands that Braintree can be proud of. Site plan review is Prudential versus Westwood, which provides that site plan review approval is granted for uses by right with or without reasonable conditions. So when you look at section 601, the table of principal uses, you will see that bank is a yes, an allowed use. You will see in section 601, the table of principal uses, that fast food is a use by right, an allowed use. There is no use discretion. Site plan review defined by the Supreme Judicial Court is regulation of a use rather than its prohibition, contemplating primarily reasonable terms and conditions. For months, Torrington has done everything asked of it, and the submissions, data, and conclusions of Torrington's traffic expert, VAI, Jeff Dirk, who's here, are supported substantially by the town's peer reviewer, and the significant site benefits to be gained, recharge and treatment of stormwater runoff with the new underground system and water quality treatment units are also supported by the town's peer reviewer on civil and on stormwater. All improvement, and that's also pointed out in the staff report. As Mr. Murphy alluded to, when you look at the staff report covers the categories of what we've submitted, A through R. There's 18 letters, A through R. And they're covered on pages 4 through 18 of the staff report. Virtually every one of them is comment satisfied, comment satisfied, comment satisfied. When you go through the 18 categories, and Jeff will address more in depth on the traffic and on the mitigation, but certainly wanted to point that out. So tonight, after this is the third hearing with the several rounds of peer reviews that have gone on since the summer, we would respectfully ask that the planning board ask to allow the staff to work with the town departments and to work with the applicant to start drafting conditions for the redevelopment of this long-standing blighted site. Torrington has stepped up with 2 market-driven tenants, uses by right. Families of all generations love and patronize Chick-fil-A and the high-grade product. Braintree families are no different. And always asking in my travels, when is Chick-fil-A going to be approved? What has taken the town so long to approve moving forward and getting rid of the old Motel 6 and Bickford's? Right now, Motel 6 and the status of the property is emblematic of not moving forward. People want to move forward. And Chick-fil-A is a great community participant, corporate citizen, contributing to community causes. You heard that the last time from Clint Mattson, who was here from Chick-fil-A corporate, and Joey Fonseca, who's here tonight, can answer any of those community participant questions that you might have. We are agreeable to all draft conditions, including the intersection and sidewalk improvements, over $1 million investment, police details as set forth in the police chief's memo of November 2nd, and ongoing monitoring for a reasonable period of time as determined by staff and the board. But failure to approve uses by right and move forward from the prevailing eyesore of 6 years would be squarely on the town and would likely lead to litigation because of the millions already spent in reasonable reliance of uses by right. What does uses by right mean? It means that when you look at our rule of law, the zoning ordinances, section 601, you see in a highway business district, as here, bank, yes. Brookline Bank, allowed use. Fast food, 601, yes, the rule of law. Chick-fil-A, allowed use. When a brand like Chick-fil-A is an allowed use, you cannot discriminate within the category of allowed use and say, well, I'll take Dunkin' Donuts but not Chick-fil-A. That's called the uniformity rule of law, and that is the case which Braintree was infamously involved in 1984, which is Skid versus the town of Braintree, where every project approved in a business zone by Braintree had to get a special permit. And the court said, no, you need to have a table of uses. There needs to be uses by right in particular zones. So all land, what does that mean? Uniformity. It means uniformity is based upon principles of equal treatment. All land in similar circumstances should be treated alike so that if one fast food use could go ahead with a certain development in a district, then so can another fast food use in the same district, here the highway business district. It means that where fast food of McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, or others could locate at this site by right, then it is arbitrary to say that the use by right in the same fast food category, Chick-fil-A, could not locate here. Of course it can. That would be a violation of uniformity and equal treatment, fundamentally wrong. Imagine if 4 years ago, Krispy Kreme was denied because of speculated demand. 4 years later, you're challenged to even find a Krispy Kreme with a drive-through line, if you can even find a Krispy Kreme location, maybe next to Blockbuster. Things change, and we've heard from Clint Mattson of Chick-fil-A that after the opening novelty, there is demand attenuation. And Chick-fil-A, as presented by Clint at the last hearing, has a well-trained team, opening team, which we will also use the police details, not only during the opening weeks, but as deemed necessary. And they have the team, and they have very skilled employee training. If you've ever been to a Chick-fil-A, they're very, very organized and efficient in the way that they operate the drive-thrus. The proposed use by right has been peer-reviewed by the traffic engineer for the town. The experts are in agreement on traffic. There are robust monitoring conditions, which we agreed to as set forth in the peer reviewer's memo of September 28th. On page 1 of the peer reviewer's report, there's agreement as to the adequacy of the analysis provided. On page 2, there's agreement on post-opening conditions of approval. The peer review recommended extending the proposed sidewalk on the east side of Ivory Street to the signalized intersection of Ivory at the MBTA and transfer station. We're going to do that. Hundreds of feet of sidewalk, several hundred feet of sidewalk will be installed not only around the perimeter of Chick-fil-A's frontage, but all the way up to the MBTA recycling intersection. Of course, that would need to be cooperatively handled with the town in any kind of construction easements and location of easements off of the layout to take into consideration transformers and other impediments that might exist in that area. But we intend to work together as Chick-fil-A, as a tenant, and as Torrington, as the owner, have done throughout this process. And we look forward to continuing that, working together. There's another case that's really important, and it's Wendy's versus the town of Billerica. And basically, that was a case where the Supreme Judicial Court gave Wendy's the ability to have a second access, and they needed a special permit. And even the DPW director was in favor of the second access. But the board said no. And basically, there was no countervailing evidence, as in this case. There's no traffic expert in this case that says this can't work or the mitigation is insufficient. There's none of that. We don't have there's no countervailing expert evidence. And that matters. It matters under Wendy's versus Billerica. And our case is more basic than that. That was a special permit where there's discretion. We're site plan review, which is the most basic form of analysis. And we've complied with the requirements of site plan review. Skepticism is insufficient. Political refusal of a tenant use is not acceptable. This is fundamental property rights. The applicant is implementing all the monitoring that's recommended by the peer review. And you heard about the opening plan from Clint Mattson and all of the other comments from the police department, which answered the question on proximity to the expressway, et cetera. I know that one of the members had a question of a bank use, and the memo pretty much says that it's not a concern. The mitigation and site characteristics that warrant the start of drafting conditions and working together toward that end with everything that we proposed, including the $1 million of off-site improvements. Those other mitigative circumstances are as follows. First, the complete updating and replacement of the signalization at Union, Ivory, Grossman intersection. This is detailed in my letter of last week, November 9th. Secondly, installation of several hundred linear feet of sidewalk, including the frontage of the site and extending in a southerly direction on the easterly side of Ivory Street up to the intersection with the recycling center. Thirdly, signalization timing changes and pedestrian phasing. Fourthly, installation of a dedicated U-turn lane on Ivory Street to facilitate right turn directly into the site at Union Street ingress-egress. No U-turns at Union Street. Fifth, the fast food use by right will hire the police details in accordance with the Braintree Police Chief's memo of November 2nd. Sixth, reduction of customer motor vehicle trips to the site, establish services like Uber Eats, Grubhub, DoorDash, trying to eliminate vehicles. Seventh, well-trained, thorough, operational staff for the weeks of store opening and throughout the year, as described by Clint Mattson at the last hearing. Next, the site has some of the greatest on-site stacking capacity, 55 to 60 cars. Next, approval conditions for ongoing traffic monitoring and analysis. Next, appropriate wayfaring and directional signage. And finally, per Mass DOT and/or MEPA process, review and extension of the deceleration lane of the southbound Union Street off-ramp, which Jeff has discussed preliminarily with Mass DOT. The local approval is not the end of the review. The project is also, as I stated, undergoing MEPA review per the request of Mass DOT to extend the deceleration lane. The staff report covers that as well. Quote, the staff report states the applicant has identified that they will proceed through the MEPA process in addition to a state highway access permit. Finally, there are no legal parties of interest who oppose the redevelopment. That's not what we've had here. Pursuant to Mass General Laws 48, Section 11, parties in interest is limited to the petitioner, abutters, owners of land directly opposite on any public or private street or way, and abutters to the abutters within 300 feet of the property line of the petitioner. There are no legal parties in interest withstanding in opposition to this redevelopment. The Zoning Act, when you look at that requirement, and you look at parties in interest, 14 are governmental entities, abutters and abutters to abutters at this site. It's a commercial location. 14 are governmental entities. 4 are commercial industrial property owners. There's no opposition by abutters and abutters to abutters. And certainly, the town of Braintree should want to move forward with this blight that has existed for the past 6 years, not through any fault of Torrington. They have a reasonable plan to move forward. They want to start as soon as possible. They want to work together with conditions of approval that will enable the multi-million-dollar investment at the site with very generous 650 plantings. Compare that to what we have now. Take a look. And also to invest another $1 million in the improvements at the intersection. So with that, I will introduce Jeff Dirk. Jeff will talk about probably the memo that he submitted on November 9th concerning the compliance with Article 14, and also the pedestrian phasing memo is another memo that you have, and that pedestrian phasing memo concludes that the site safely operates for pedestrians with the mitigative measures that we have discussed tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. For the record, Jeffrey Dirk with Vanessa & Associates for the transportation consultants on the project. So I think between our attorney and the planning department, you've heard kind of a summary of what we've done since the last time we were before you. And I think the primary new piece of information that was submitted was with respect to the review of Article 14 and the 2 pieces of Article 14. I'll go through just each one of them quickly because I know the board is very familiar with them. So there's 2 components to Article 14. The first is the Condition A, as we've kind of termed it. And that, as the Assistant Director had mentioned, really deals with changes in levels of service at the intersection. So what we've done is compared the no-build condition to the build condition and identified the instances where there were any levels of service changes at the study intersections. And was noted there were 4 intersections where we did identify level of service changes. The first, of course, was the Union Ivory Street intersection. And just to kind of put the numbers in context in terms of number of level of service changes, as you know, there's multiple movements that occur at this intersection. We took the conservative approach of looking at not only the overall level of service, but the level of service for each individual movement at the intersection and determined where there were any changes that may affect either the individual movements or the overall intersection operations. So at the Ivory Street, Union Street intersection, we identified that there were 4 to 5 level of service changes, and I give that range because we're looking at 3 periods, the morning peak period, the evening peak period, and the Saturday midday peak period. So as we look at those 3 peak periods, during any one of those peak periods at that intersection, we identified there were 4 to 5 movements that between the no build and the build condition had a change in level of service. At the Pearl Street, Ivory Street intersection, we identified 1 movement that had a level of service change. That occurred during the evening peak hour only. At the Ivory Street Plaza driveway, there was 1 movement that had changed a level of service. That occurred during only the evening peak hour. And then at the Union Street Rotary, we had 2 movements that had a change in level of service, and that occurred during the weekday evening peak hour. Before I move on to what we're doing to address that as it relates to the Rotary, what I wanted to mention is that the change in level of service was not the southbound off-ramp from Route 3. The level of service didn't change because that is at capacity today. So really the change as we look at it is no change in level of service, but of course, as you've heard at the past 2 hearings, I think the queue gets longer. And so we're addressing that, but there isn't a level of service change as it relates to that movement. So the condition allows for the developer to implement mitigation subject to the board's review and acceptance of that mitigation to address these level of service changes. So as you've heard, I think you can go to the next slide, please. So as you've heard, at the Ivory Street, Grossman Street intersection, again, we've spent a lot of time discussing the improvements at this intersection. This is a wholesale reconstruction of this intersection. So it's replacement of signs, pavement markings, brand new pavement, and we're milling and overlaying and replacing the entire traffic signal system. So everything, underground, above ground, is being replaced at this intersection. We're adding crosswalks, so we're improving pedestrian mobility. We're replacing wheelchair ramps. We're retiming the traffic signals. So with all of that mitigation in place, the overall level of service, which is a measurement of what we describe as the pain that everyone experiences as they use that intersection, balanced out. So it looks at the overall performance of the intersection. The overall performance of the intersection with these improvements will be equal to or better than the no-build condition. So it's an improvement over the conditions that exist if the project did not go forward and there were no mitigation at that intersection. There will continue to be level of service changes, although the number of changes that will occur, instead of 4 to 5 movements at the intersection, that would actually go down to 1 to 3 movements. The important thing I want to mention about that is, as you heard our attorney mention, even if we did not build this project and the town were to hire me or your consultant to come up with an improvement, how could we retime this intersection to make it operate better? If we're not adding lanes at the intersection, which is not something that can happen here, the way that we improve operations at the intersection is we take specific movements that are not critical and that they may be operating at a B or a C level of service. We may actually degrade those levels of service and bring them down to a D, let's say, in order to improve the overall operation of the intersection by making a movement that's at an E, let's say, to a D. So what that does as it relates to overall intersection operations is it makes the intersection operate better. So as a motorist, in general, you're going to experience less delay, but depending on which approaches you're coming to the intersection at, you may experience more delay. But on balance, the intersection operates better. What we're doing with the mitigation here, the reason why we still have drops in level of service is because we're taking movements that under the no-build condition are operating over their design capacity and have extended vehicle queuing. And instead of having them operate over capacity, we're bringing them to a condition where they operate either at the design capacity of the approach or better. And so in order to achieve that, some of the movements will experience a drop in level of service because they're not critical. So let's say during the morning peak hour, if there's not a lot of traffic coming off the Grossman's Drive approach, we may take that movement and degrade its level of service in order to make the Union Street movements operate better because the turn, let's say, going to the MBTA station is critical. And we want to have that movement operate not over capacity, but at least at capacity or better and reduce the queuing. So in order to achieve that, we would make the approach that doesn't have such demand, will drop its level of service, increase the delays in order to benefit that one movement.
Okay, interrupt you there.
Yeah.
So does that mean that the light would be shorter at Grossman than the other sides? Can you explain what you mean
Exactly.
by that?
So
Okay.
we would take some of what we term the green time, and we look at, if you looked at our responses to one of the members' questions about the traffic signal phasing, each of the movements, as we all know, it's green, it goes yellow, it goes red. The amount of that green time that's allocated to a specific movement, if it's 20 seconds, we may make it 19 seconds and take the additional time that was there and move it to another approach, keeping the overall cycle length, so the time it takes to go all the way around for all the movements, holding that, but reallocating the time so that we make the green time for one movement longer by reducing the green time for another movement within the overall cycle length.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing at the intersection. So we do show drops in levels of service, but overall the intersection is the same or better than no build, and no movement at the intersection is operating over its design capacity, which is an improvement over the no-build condition. So that's what we're doing at the Ivory-Grossman intersection. At both the Washington Union and Pearl-Ivory intersections, we are committed to retiming the traffic signals at those intersections. We were always going to do it at the Washington Union intersection because that intersection is interconnected and coordinated with the Union Ivory intersection during one of the peak hours. So it's coordinated so they operate together. So if we make changes at this one intersection, we have to make changes at the other intersection. The Pearl Ivory Street intersection, the retiming of that traffic signal is a new mitigation commitment, and that is done in order to address compliance with condition A of Article 14. With the retiming of the traffic signal at both of those intersections, we are restoring operating conditions to no build, so that there's no change in level of service between the no build and the build condition with the mitigation that we're doing. And then lastly, at the Union Street Rotary, and you can go to the next slide, please. As you had heard, we are committed to two things there. The first is the extension of the vehicle queue storage. Again, this was a discussion item not only with your consultant, but with Mass DOT. We provided to them the analysis that we have of the intersection, looking at the impacts of this project. This is the mitigation measure that they've asked us to implement as a part of this project in order to address the project's impacts at the Rotary. And so we are moving forward with this. And then the other component of this was, at the recommendation of the police chief, is that to the extent that there is the need for police detail officers to move traffic as it relates to either, coming off the Rotary or just circulation within the Rotary itself, the applicant is committed to undertaking and paying for police details to the extent that that is deemed necessary. But again, Mass DOT has reviewed our analysis for the Rotary, and this is the mitigation item that they've asked us to implement as a part of this project to address the project's impacts at the Rotary itself. So the next item as it relates to Article 14 is Condition B. So now we're moving from changes in level of service to traffic volume increases. So Condition B states that we have certain percentage increase in traffic that is allowed on roadways that provide access to the project site. The measurement of those conditions is the same as we look at as level of service. So we're required to look at no build versus build condition, look at the percent increase in traffic and see if it falls within what the allowable range is as denoted in Figure 1 of Article 14, Condition B. The roadways that provide access to this project site we would deem as high volume roadways, so they would be under Condition B, 10,000 plus vehicles per day on those roadways. So at 10,000 vehicles plus per day, a project is allowed to increase traffic up to 10%. So that's the threshold limit. We provided in our November 9th memorandum a detailed table that looks at daily traffic volume increases on each of the roadway segments that were in our study area. And so you see that in great detail. And what you see as you look at the table is the only place that we had exceedances, it only occurred, again, morning, we have 3 peak hours that we're looking at, as well as the weekday and Saturday condition. The only time that we had an exceedance was during the Saturday midday. So it was not an average weekday exceedance, it was during the Saturday midday. And the exceedance happened on 3 roadway segments. And these, I'm gonna ask you to go back, Greg, if you could, back to the plan with the Union Street intersection. So the 3 roadway segments where we did show an exceedance above 10%, again, only on a Saturday, was the segment of Ivory Street. Let's see if I can use this to move. So I'll come over here. So the project site is here. We've spent, I apologize for being behind you. We spent a lot of time talking about these U-turn maneuvers. So because of the fact that we have these U-turn maneuvers, there's 3 segments of roadway that, depending on where you're coming from, you have to traverse that roadway segment twice. So we're essentially on certain roadway segments, a typical project, you'd only have the vehicle going by it once. Because of the U-turn maneuvers, it basically doubles the volume on a certain roadway segment. So it's unique to this site. So the areas where we're showing the exceedance is Ivory Street, basically between Union Street and where the U-turn maneuver happens, because if you're coming from the east and you want to go to the project site, as we measure the traffic volume increase, you travel on this segment of Ivory Street once, you reverse direction, and you travel on the same roadway segment twice. So this roadway segment, when you measure the volume of traffic, the same vehicle has to traverse it twice. So we showed an exceedance during the Saturday on that segment. The same thing happens on 2 segments on Ivory Street. And for the purposes of our analysis, we broke it up into 2 pieces, basically between Ivory Street and the driveway, and then between Union Street, the Rotary and the driveway. And the same condition happens because of the U-turn maneuvers. Some vehicles have to traverse those 2 roadway segments twice in order to get to the site and then to actually leave the site as well, because if you want to head back towards Washington Street, You're going to exit the project site, so you traverse one leg of, say, Ivory Street between the rotary, then you need to go around the rotary and you come back, and so now I'm heading in the westbound direction. So the only reason why we have the exceedance is because of the fact that we have these U-turn maneuvers happening, plus the fact that we have a median, and if you want to head westbound, you exit the site, and then you have to use the rotary, go around it, and then come back on this section of roadway. So I mention it because it is unique to this site, but from the standpoint of condition B, it's a fact as it relates to this project site. And so we've shown that in the table. We have proposed mitigation measures also to address condition B. So unlike condition A, where we implement mitigation measures to improve operating conditions on the roadway, in order to achieve compliance with condition B, we physically have to remove traffic. So we have to get an equivalent amount of vehicles off the roadway to get ourselves down to that 10% exceedance. And so the way that we remove traffic is to implement a couple of things. The first is the transportation demand management measures. So this is really focused on employee trips, which granted, it's not going to be a significant amount of traffic as it relates to the project, but again, we're able to implement measures to encourage people to walk, bike, use public transportation, or to carpool, or to eliminate the need to leave the project site. So again, we have two pieces or two components of the project. We have the restaurant, we also have the bank, we have employees associated with those two. So the transportation demand management program is really meant to reduce employee-related trips to the project site, and so that's something that we're committed to doing as a part of the project. You heard our attorney also mention this phenomenon of delivery service providers. So that is your Uber Eats, DoorDash, those type of things. So that is going to be something that, as a part of the project, we will be putting forth as a part of, if you go to the website, or your ability to be able to order online at this location, and then have delivery by DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, or something like that. So that's a way to try to encourage reduction in customer-related trips. So if, for example, if someone doesn't want to drive to this intersection, but they want to order from Chick-fil-A, they can do that through a website app or on your phone, and then have a do that. So that will cut down on trips related to ordering at the restaurant. It also allows for pooling trips. So as we talked about carpooling, this is a way of carpooling orders. So essentially having multiple people place an order, having one delivery driver deliver the food. So that's something we're committed to doing. And then lastly, is related to mobility. So we have spent a lot of time in speaking with staff, your review consultant, as well as during the public comment process about making sure that we have a very safe and walkable environment here. So we started off with the reconstruction of the intersection at Union Street and Ivory Street to add the crosswalk. We spent a lot of time talking about the leading pedestrian interval and making sure it's safe to cross at the intersection. And then lastly, at the recommendation of staff, which you've seen in the plan here tonight as well, although it might have been very small to see it, but our attorney had mentioned it, we're extending a sidewalk along our side of Ivory Street that will allow for connectivity between the MBTA station up to the project site, so that you'll have a safe sidewalk to be able to walk from the MBTA station up to the project site. So we're actually adding connectivity from two sides or two places to be able to get from the MBTA side over to the project site. One is the crossing at Ivory Street at the intersection right at the project site, and now this sidewalk extension that will allow you to cross at the MBTA driveway and then walk up to the project site. Again, these are measures that are intended to be able to allow for walkability, so mobility, so that we can reduce customer-related traffic at the project site. So that's our review of compliance with Article 14, both Condition A and Condition B. And again, that requires, obviously, discussion from the board. We've offered what the mitigation measures are to address those compliance items, but again, that's at the discretion of the board. And I think we've made our case as it relates to Condition A and how we're improving level of service at the intersection that we're looking at, and then as it relates to Condition B, the measures that we intend to implement in order to reduce traffic to try to get things back down to the 10% threshold that we're allowed to have. And again, focusing on that 10% threshold, it's 3 locations. It's only during the Saturday that happens, And the 3 locations that we're talking about are unique in nature in that they relate to the U-turn maneuvers at the location. So because the same vehicle travels over the same segment of roadway twice, the amount of traffic that needs to be reduced is not a large number. It's about 14 vehicles in one case. The most it would be is 38 vehicles. So we're not talking about large numbers that we need to reduce in terms of overall traffic at the intersection. I can stop there as it relates to Article 14, or I can just briefly go to the pedestrian phase diagrams, and then I can go through those ad nauseum, or it can be something that's quick, and that'll conclude all that I have to present, and then I can answer questions. I leave it to the chair.
I think the overview of those crossing
That sounds good.
would be great.
And so as an engineer, these might seem complicated, but what I tried to do here is, to the best I could, try to look at various ways that others might look at the phasing of the traffic signal, more related to how does the pedestrian phase work in relation to the entire traffic signal phasing. I tried to simplify it, and my letter does describe various iterations that you could look at as the way that the signal operates. But the traffic signal here it operates under it basically has 3 timing plans. It has a morning, an evening, and a Saturday midday timing plan. The timing in terms of what we were talking about in terms of the amount of green time is different depending on the time of day that the signal is operating. So you have 3 drawings that I provided for each of the time periods. This one happens to show the weekday evening timing. So these are the phases that the signal goes through. So phases 1, and it steps through this. Phase 1 is Union Street toward the Rotary. So this is an eastbound direction. So that's phase 1. Phase 2 is Union Street from the Rotary heading towards Washington Street. So phase 1 is eastbound Union Street. Phase 2 is westbound Union Street. Phase 3 is Grossman Drive. And phase 4 is Ivory Street. And the traffic signal controller operates in a logical fashion in that it basically goes through each of these phases. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and then it comes back to phase 1. So that's the way that the traffic signal operates. Phase 1, which is eastbound Union Street, includes the pedestrian phase for crossing Ivory Street. So that's why you see that going at the same time the vehicle movements. Phase 2 includes the pedestrian phase across Grossman Drive. Phase 3 includes the pedestrian phase for crossing the Union Street west leg of the intersection. And then phase 4, which is Ivory Street, does not have a pedestrian phase associated with it. So as we're looking at the phases for the intersection, when phase 1 operates, so if you're a pedestrian and you happen to come to the intersection and you want to cross Grossman Drive, so I come up to the intersection, I push the push button, and we're at phase 1. So as a pedestrian, what you're going to see at the intersection, because it's not phase 2 yet, you push the push button, it's in phase 1, is you're going to see the don't walk symbol. So you're going to stand on the corner at Grossman Drive, and you're going to have to wait for phase 1 to progress. So you push the push button. Phase 1 is a total time of 36 seconds. So you're going to stand at that intersection for 36 seconds. And after the phase 1 concludes, which is 36 seconds in duration, then the walking symbol is going to come up. So then you'll be able to cross the intersection during phase 2. You'll be able to cross the intersection for the full time that's there, which the pedestrian phase is 39 seconds to cross the intersection, which is sufficient time to get from curb to curb, essentially, is how we're timing the signal. And then you will have completed your pedestrian crossing. So if I'm looking at the signal system and I'm at phase 1, let's say, and I want to cross the Union Street west leg of the intersection, and I push the push button, I'm going to have to wait for phase 1 to finish and then phase 2 to finish before that walking symbol is going to come up. So phase 1's 36 seconds, phase 2 is 42 seconds. So if I'm looking at that time there, what I've got is I'm going to wait 78 seconds before I'm going to be able to cross the intersection. So you can look at various iterations of when do I push the push button and when does that phase come up when I can be able to walk. And all you need to do is just add up each of these times and it will determine how long you have to wait at the intersection. The important thing is I think the longest time that you'd have to wait, I think, is about 82 seconds, something like that, depending on where you push the button in the various combination of phasing that happens. The important part of that as it relates to the discussion that we had for exclusive pedestrian phasing, it's the same thing. So you would have to wait, that's the amount of time, the maximum amount of time you'd have to wait depending on where you push the button in the phases that here. So it doesn't really, the wait time for a pedestrian is no different for the concurrent phasing that we have proposed and exclusive phasing. But there's various combinations that you can come up with depending on where you push the push button. But that would be the maximum time you would ever have to wait, either with an exclusive pedestrian phase or with a concurrent phasing that we have here. One of the things, though, that it's important to mention is if you hit the intersection at the right time and for some reason I wanted to cross from one side of Grossman Drive and then come across the intersection, if I get there at the right time, let's say in phase 2, and I push the push button, it may be something that if I'm walking from here to here, I can actually cross from here to here and then push the push button and then get across the intersection. There's the possibility with concurrent pedestrian phasing that as a pedestrian, depending on where you're going, it's quicker for you to actually get through the intersection than if you pushed it for an exclusive pedestrian phase and I cross one leg, I can't cross again until it goes all the way around to the beginning of the cycle. Whereas in this situation here, there was the opportunity that you could actually have a shorter wait time to actually cross the intersection. And again, we provided these same diagrams for each of the peak periods so you can look at various combinations, add up the time, and then figure out how long it would take depending on where you push the push button in the signal cycle. So that concludes the new information that we provided, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have now or later on this evening.
Great, thank you. And I do want to hear from our peer reviewer, but I know Member McCamey had questions on the pedestrian phasing. So I just wanted to see, while Mr. Dirk was presenting on that point, if you wanted to ask any of your questions at this, or we can wait until after the peer reviewer.
Why don't we have the peer review?
Okay, great. All right, so thank you, Mr. Dirk.
thank you.
And then Mr. Lucas, if we could hear from you on the traffic.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. For the record, Greg Lucas with Ty and Bond, the traffic peer reviewer on the project. We had an opportunity to review the 2 new letters that were provided by Jeff Dirk and Vanessa and Associates on Article 14 and on the pedestrian phasing. And of course, I'm a traffic engineer, so I enjoy this presentation very much. It's clear to me. I think while I understand to a layperson this may be challenging to understand, I think that it was well explained. Specifically, the idea that this is iterative. The point where the pedestrian pushes the button matters on how long they're going to have to wait with pedestrian phasing, and that's true of concurrent phasing or exclusive phasing. There is an opportunity with the concurrent phasing, depending on where you're crossing, that your wait would be shorter than it would be with exclusive phasing, because you have to do things in if you're crossing multiple legs, you have to do it in multiple stages. And so there may be some benefit. Again, it's wholly dependent on where you're crossing, when you're coming, when you push the button, and where you fall in that line as it relates to the opening. I'll just go over here and point something out. What's important to understand is that here, these white spaces, this is your walk for each of these phases. So that's the point where the walk would come on if you push the button for that approach. And so wholly dependent on where you come in this timeline. Think of this as a timeline. This is running continuously. When you push the button and how it relates to the specific walk for the crossing that you want to use. For the letter regarding the, push that down more. Letter regarding the Article 14 compliance, it was well stated how you would look at, how you would approach this, and it was true what Jeff said, that I would approach this the same way, any competent traffic engineer would approach it the same way. When you're looking at an intersection where you have capacity issues and you're looking to retime and balance that capacity, that there may be approaches that don't necessarily have a capacity issue, where you might slightly degrade level of service because it operates as an acceptable level of service today. And so that balance could be, some gain, some degradation, but overall gain. And that's what's happened here. The information that was presented in that letter is consistent with the information that was presented in the traffic study, the information that we had previously reviewed, and is accurate to the impact of the project. As far as the overall increase over 10%, also accurately stated, and the mitigation measures can help reduce that impact. We're talking about small numbers into what it would take to reduce that below that 10% threshold. So we didn't prepare any formal review memo for this because there wasn't anything to comment on. We were in agreement with things that are presented, and I hope that my explanation might have helped provide some more clarity for the board, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And I think Mr. Diaz, I think there were a couple open questions on your end, if you don't mind just explaining those.
Sure. Just once again for the record, Eric Dias, registered professional engineer, Strong Point Engineering. I am the stormwater peer reviewer. We have reviewed a revised set of plans and issued our 4th peer review letter. We did have a meeting, a virtual meeting with the assistant director and the project team yesterday, I believe, and we went over these. A few of these, a lot of these are comment satisfied. A few of these are kind of simple, just memorialization type of things, but there's 3 in particular that I think it bears discussion, and I'm actually going to start at the back of my letter and work my way forward, because I think that goes from easiest to most challenging, and it's probably the best way to do this. So the first comment that I wanted to talk about has to do with the floodplain elevation, and obviously this project is a special permit, and the floodplain special permit is held by this board, so I think it's important. This comment was actually made by a member of the Conservation Commission, and it was a good catch. The floodplain elevation on the site is elevation 64. So the idea with the floodplain, as you know, is that if you fill a portion of the site that would flood in the existing condition, you sort of kick the can, right? You're going to flood out, if you can't store water on your site, you're going to flood out your neighbor down the stream, and we want to avoid that. So the general rule of thumb, as you know, is that you have to have the same volume to hold water in the post condition as you do the pre-condition. The design currently, within that 64 contour, has a small high point of 64.5, so it's 6 inches. What that means is that ridge effectively cuts off the storage to the rest of the site. So what would have to happen for the water to get all the way through and inundate the 64 contour, it would actually have to rise 6 inches above that, over top that ridge, and then fill the rest of the 64. So to the extent that the waters don't rise that far, we would in effect be kicking the can down the stream. So the short answer to that is really just a couple of tweaks to the grading, right? You take one of those portions of the ridge, you drop it down just below that 64, so you maintain a hydrologic connection, and it shouldn't be a big deal. And that's one of the things that we talked about, an improvement to the plan set the other day. So we're just gonna take a look at that when it comes through and confirm that it does the job, and I think we can put that one to bed. The next one is with regard to the existing, the town's existing closed drainage system. So a good portion of the neighborhood drains through a closed drainage system and discharges to the stream through a 36-inch pipe that's there. This proposed project is proposing to connect to that same pipe. And in one storm event, they're showing a very slight increase in flow to that pipe. So the question becomes, can the pipe handle it, right? If that pipe is currently, during a storm event, flowing at or very near capacity, and we send more water to it, we are either A, going to have a flooding condition within our property, or we're gonna push the flooding issue somewhere up gradient in the system. So we wanna confirm that that pipe can take it. The project team did provide an analysis, and I think the basis of the analysis makes sense. They took a look at the maximum flow that could be coming from the pipes contributing to that pipe in the town system and compared it to the increase in flow that would be going to it from their project and show that the number is below the capacity of what that pipe can handle. I think that the methodology makes sense. The one note that we had is that that calculation is based on a few assumptions about the existing conditions of the closed drainage network of the town, one of those being the slope of the pipe contributing to that 36-inch pipe. When you run the numbers again, they've assumed the 2% slope, which is common, but if the slope of that pipe were to increase by 1%, it would effectively show an overwhelming of that pipe. So what we've just asked them to do is confirm the slope of that pipe. I know they've done some record research, not a ton of records available, so I think they're gonna have to get out there and pop the manhole. Obviously, it's a busy road, we're gonna need police details, so that's an ongoing situation. And provided, you know, hopefully we open that up, we find that it's 2% or less, and it puts that issue to bed as well. The last note, and this is the one that gets a little trickier from a regulatory standpoint, is with regard to groundwater elevation and groundwater recharge and groundwater mounding analysis. So what the state standard says effectively is that if you have an infiltration system that is used to attenuate flow, meaning to control and slow the flow of stormwater, and that system is located within 4 feet of groundwater, you need to provide a groundwater mounding analysis. The proponent has provided a groundwater mounding analysis. What that mounding analysis is required to show is that 72 hours after a storm event, that system, that infiltration system, is dry and is ready to absorb the next storm event. The groundwater mounding analysis currently does not show that. Then we get into the discussion of whether or not it's actually required under the regulation. There has been discussion from the design team that the system, the infiltration system, is not being utilized to provide peak rate attenuation. And in the event that it's not, purely through the regulation, that groundwater mounding requirement goes away. So a couple of options. One, provide a calculation showing that the system is not providing peak rate attenuation, right? That could be as simple as looking at the hydrologic model, unplugging that component of it, bypassing it, and showing that there's no increase in flow at the design point. That would prove that case. Shy of being able to do that, the groundwater mounding calculation is still in play, so we would be looking at either some adjustments to system elevations, maybe revision of the depth of the system in a different type of chamber, things of that nature. So I think we're getting close. I think that we did discuss on the call yesterday kind of an A, B, and C approach to solve each one of these issues. I think it's just on the project team at this point to run it down and find out what the best solution is to each one. But that's all I've got for now, but I'm glad to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions at this point? No. All right, and then if there's any response from the applicant team on the stormwater?
Yeah, hi, Greg DeBono with Bowler Engineering. I just wanted to say I agree with everything that Eric just summarized, and that's very consistent with everything we talked about on our call yesterday. Most of the items that we just discussed, we've already looked into in the past 24 hours, and we're confident we're going to be able to address all these comments. Our plan is to get back itemized response letters and plans back out the door before the end of this week. So we'll have adequate time for another round of review and acknowledgement of these updated calculations prior to our next meeting. We also, worth noting, we will be in front of the Conservation Commission on the 30th. So our documents, including responses, will go back to Conservation Commission as well, which will address their initial round of comments, which were kind of tied together with the fourth stormwater peer review. While I'm up here, I can quickly, I only have one more slide. Let me just show us the rest. And all this is I just wanted to clarify, we submitted a full revised set of documents back on the 30th, including updated drainage report. But the reality of all those changes, what it really equaled was these three little highlighted areas on the plan. That's the only stuff above grade that got altered as part of the resubmission. So I just wanted to highlight that so everybody's aware of what we changed. And these were directly related to prior comment letters or discussions we had at our last meeting. So the first item is just the alignment of our proposed sidewalk along Union Street. So we took that sidewalk, we hugged it closer to the property line, pulled it further away from the curb, so you have a little bit more of a buffer in there between the edge of curb on Union. There's gonna be a landscape, like lawn strip, and then the sidewalk. So that's what you see with that realignment of the sidewalk. The second item is a new sidewalk connection directly into Ivory, or sidewalk portion along Ivory. So you see that little section of sidewalk that comes down and then now connects with another on-site pedestrian crosswalk that ties directly into the sidewalk for the bank. So just another way for folks to get into the site without having to go all the way around the corner and cross the main access drive. So if you're coming from that new sidewalk connection that we mentioned several times earlier in the night, where the sidewalk will be extended from Ivory Street further up, you'll have now an ability to cut into the site earlier. And the last item was really just additional landscaping. As we mentioned in the prior meetings, we had already roughly about 600 plants on site, but we weren't really providing much buffering to the adjacent landfill property. Although not really much to screen now, but who knows what could be there in the future. So we acknowledge that let's put some additional landscaping in along that drive queue lane. So there's 36 additional evergreen trees being put in and 3 more shade trees. So that's what's shown in these red rev clouds. Everything else that we changed was really just the specific details of the hydrology and the drainage calcs, adjusting our basin bottom elevation to provide that separation to groundwater, and readjusting our calculations based on seasonal high groundwater being 100 inches below surface grade. So that was really kind of it that we've changed.
And while you're up there, is there a pedestrian connection, or can there be, between the bank and the Chick-fil-A if you're cutting through that Ivory Street?
So the issue we have is, once you get into the parking lot, you basically have your ability to walk through the parking like anybody who would come and park, and like anybody who comes to the site to, be served by the restaurant. If we were to change the alignment, we'd either lose parking or we'd lose landscape area. We are right at that threshold now. We did increase our impervious coverage slightly for the parking, for the sidewalk connection to Ivory. We're still below the threshold. We're at 74.7% now, or before we were at 74.5%. So we did have a slight increase, and we'd like to maintain it under that, so we're not asking for additional relief beyond the 75% allowance.
I guess from my perspective, I'd rather see a easier pedestrian than the landscaping, although I like the landscaping. I guess, is it possible, even if it's not something that's put in where the landscaping is sort of behind where the dumpster is going to go, to put another sidewalk in there, or does the bank drive-through make that problematic?
Yeah, you would. I mean, you're right. The bank drive-through does wrap around the let's call it the south side of the building, and then you also have the double drive-through queue for the Chick-fil-A, which we don't want to enter more pedestrian activity through that queue, just because you already have the vehicles there and you have the employees that would be doing remote order sessions. So the intent is to keep the flow directly through the parking field, directly to the front door as quickly as you can.
Okay. All right. And before I move on to questions, anybody else from the applicant team or should I move on to questions?
I think we've provided everything that we have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, then I will start with Member McCamey.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Dirk for his memo and his comprehensive and colorful chart. I did ask him last time for a single number. I guess the moral of the story is never ask a traffic engineer for a single number. But if I could ask Mr. Dirk a few follow-up questions, I'd appreciate that.
Good evening.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So when I'm looking at phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, correct me if I'm wrong, but phase 4 is the crossing at Ivory Street. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, the Ivory Street crossing occurs during phase 1. Phase 4 does not have a crossing associated with it.
Okay. Where is Ivory Street in this? You know, which was my
I'm sorry.
question.
Yes.
Originally.
So it's actually, north would be straight up as you're looking at these. So Ivory Street crossing occurs during phase 1 when the eastbound Union Street movement is happening.
Okay, so okay, so I looked at this wrong.
Yes.
I thought Ivory Street was phase
No,
4, but okay,
yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah.
So, okay, how long is the pedestrian light? Is it 30 seconds?
It's a total, the time that a pedestrian has to walk, it's 33 seconds.
Yeah.
For that phase.
So when the number is flashing,
Yes.
what number is that?
You're going to see it count down for 33 seconds is what you'll see.
I'm going to see 33 seconds.
It's going to slowly step you down to 0 starting at
So
that.
30, I'm going to see 33, which seems unusual to me, but okay, 33 down to 0.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. And so therefore, are all these lights 33?
No, because it's 33 for this. So the total pedestrian, phase 1 is 33 seconds to cross Ivory Street. It's 39 seconds to cross Grossman Drive because it's longer and wider. And then it's 26 seconds to cross Union Street because it's shorter. The width, the time that's required is how long it takes you to step from curb to curb. And so as each of the lengths gets wider, you need more time to cross. That's why the phasing time changes.
Okay. That actually was the number I was looking for last time. Okay, so 33 seconds. Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. And if no one hits the pedestrian walk, what happens?
It just stays as the don't walk.
Okay, no, I understand that, but in terms of the lights and the sequencing for the traffic.
So what you would look at is that if there's vehicles always at the intersection, so there's always somebody waiting, this is how it would work. Because the signal is dynamic, it will change. So if you have a condition like right now, let's say, and there's not a lot of traffic coming out of Grossman Drive, what it will do is it will keep the green on the approach that has demand. So if there's always traffic on Union Street, it will stay green on Union Street until a car pulls up to Grossman Drive, and then it will detect the car, and then it will say, okay, there's a car waiting, so I'm gonna move myself around and then call the Grossman Drive phase. So what can happen is if a pedestrian doesn't push a push button, and there's also no traffic, let's say, coming on Grossman Drive, it'll stay green on Union Street until a vehicle pulls up and is detected by the traffic signal. So this, when you're looking at this, this is basically the way the signal would operate during the morning rush hour. When there's traffic all over the intersection, this is how it would operate there. When it's not at a condition where there's always vehicles on an approach, it stays green until a car comes up or a pedestrian pushes the push button, and then it would, so what it does is it reallocates the time. And so if 36 seconds aren't needed, whatever time is not used goes to the next phase. That's the way it works.
Okay, I was actually looking more at the evening phase, but that's okay. So, all right, so we understand the phasing. So what you're telling me, and tell me if I'm incorrect, is that this is the way the signaling would work for pedestrians walking.
Correct.
But if nobody hits the button, the light sequence for the cars could be slightly different.
Exactly. And If you stood out there with a stopwatch and tried to replicate this, you probably wouldn't because the signal is dynamic. And so the other thing that it does is if there's only 10 cars on Grossman Drive, let's say, it's only going to give enough time for those 10 cars to get processed. And then if there's no more cars coming, it's not going to run for the full time that's allocated for it. So if there is 29 seconds for traffic to move on Grossman Drive, but there's only 3 cars, it's only going to give enough time for those 3 cars, which could be 10 seconds.
Sure.
And then whatever time is left over is going to get added to the next phase so that the total is equal to 120.
All right.
It's
so-
very dynamic.
Yeah, okay, so how does the traffic situation capture that dynamic? Is there like an electric eye or something sitting on the signals, or how does that work?
So there's actually what you'll see, and what will happen in this case is there's a video camera.
Okay.
On each of the mast arms that goes across the intersection, you'll actually see like a camera. It looks like a CCTV camera that's up there. What that is doing is it's telling the controller, similar to when a push button, and we said it places a call to the controller, that sensor places a call to the controller to say there's a car waiting instead of a pedestrian. And then what it's also doing is counting the number of cars that are there. So it knows there's a car waiting. I'm going to give that car a green light, and then what it does is it gives a certain amount of time for each successive car to get through the intersection until it either reaches the maximum, 42 seconds. It'll keep processing vehicles until 42 seconds is reached. Then it goes yellow, all red, it goes to the next phase. If 42 seconds is not needed and you only need 20, it's only going to go for 20 seconds, and then it's going to go to the next phase and add the time to the extra phase there. So it's very dynamic, but there's sensors. There'll be cameras that are the sensors that will be detecting all of this.
Okay, thank you. I think I get that. And this might be a strange question for a traffic engineer, but you know, you're going to add sidewalks, you're going to do all this stuff. Have you modeled how many pedestrians are going to be crossing?
We actually have with your consultants. And so when we're reporting those levels of service and the changes in the level of service, it is reflective of pedestrians pushing the push button. And during these time periods, I believe we have push buttons being actuated during each of the phases. Because again, as we're modeling it, it is what we call saturated conditions, means there's always a call and there's always a pedestrian, meaning that that pedestrian is going to hit the button for each of the phases.
Okay, so you put that in. You know, it would be today, of course, there's nothing to cross the street for.
Correct.
So, I mean, I'd be interested. I think other board members, people would be interested. You know, what kind of numbers of pedestrians are you modeling? So if we can get that, I'd appreciate that. It'd be interesting to look at it.
So what we report in terms of, we don't report the number of pedestrians, we report in the analysis the number of times the push button's pushed. Because that's really what, from the operations of the signal, it's really sense. How many times you're going to push the button rather than how many pedestrians are crossing.
Okay, so let's say at the evening commute, basically you're going to have people getting off the T, and let's just make the assumption that some of them are going to go over to the restaurant. So you're modeling that the button is going to be constantly pushed.
The majority of time during the signal cycle, yes. The one dynamic you have anytime you've got MBTA service like the subway is that, you know, good and bad in that the car comes in, everyone gets out, and then there's no train cars. So during that peak hour, you only have so many trains that are arriving that are going to dispatch pedestrians.
Right.
So, you know, it's not like a continuous flow like you'd have in a downtown setting. It's really dependent on those train arrivals. So you have surges that happen, but not consistently over the course of the hour. It's dependent on the arrivals of the trains. But yes, that's included in the modeling.
Well, that assumes the train arrives, right? Okay, so if that's the case, then if I'm looking at this correctly, the button gets pushed every 120 seconds.
Right.
Okay.
Right. If you're assuming that it's going to happen every single cycle, that's correct.
Well, I'm just wondering what you're assuming.
Yes, that's the way you would assume that it would operate.
Okay.
The dynamic of having concurrent pedestrian phasing, unlike exclusive phasing, is that on the exclusive phasing, the entire intersection gets shut down. Whereas with the concurrent pedestrian phasing, even though the button is being pushed, every time the button's being pushed, the only lost time to vehicle movements is that leading pedestrian interval. So it's 3 seconds. That's when no vehicles are moving. But as you can see, if you push the push button to cross Ivory Street, the eastbound flow of traffic on Union Street is still moving. The only difference is there's 3 seconds of time that a vehicle can't move. That's being reduced every time the button gets pushed from a capacity standpoint.
Right. Okay, I'm going to switch topics a little bit. I noticed in the report that we got from the Assistant Director, there was information here about level of service, vehicle queuing, trip generation summary, and if I could just ask you how to read this appropriately. So the workday evening hour, we're looking at 340 more cars. Am I looking at it correctly? It's table 4, chip generation summary.
Maybe I should, and this is in the staff
Peak
report?
hour, so that is per hour then. Connor, is that right?
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
So I'm looking at chart 4.
Yes.
And it says weekday morning peak hour, for example, it says 92 cars. I'm assuming that that's 92 cars, and I just want to know, is that per hour or the total period?
Those are during the peak hours.
So 7 to 8, 7 to 9? So that's the total new trips?
1 hour, yeah.
No? 1 per hour. Okay, excellent.
The peak hour.
The peak hour, which is defined as?
The 4 highest 15-minute intervals.
Correct. So let's just say would be, let's just say 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning.
7:30 to 8:30. Okay.
Yeah,
At
I can give you the,
nighttime,
yeah,
at
actually, let me-
nighttime, it would be,
yeah, let me give you the exact times rather than, because we
yeah,
have those.
okay.
So the morning is 7:15 to 8:15.
Yep.
The evening is 4:30 to 5:30. And then the Saturday midday is 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's when these volumes would occur.
Okay. 4:30 to 5:30. Okay. 340. All right. Okay. I don't think I have any more questions for you, but thank you, Mr. Dirk.
Thank you.
I'd love to go through the volumes and the impact and, you know, LOS, this and that, but, you know, we don't really have time for that. But I guess my general comment would be that, and maybe this is for the staff, one of the residents asked one time, you know, what's our plan B? So, you know, we heard a lot about what all this different changes, mitigation, and what's going to improve, not improve, things stay at an F or a D or whatever. So what I'm concerned about is what are we going to do if it fails horribly? If the traffic is really, really bad, what are we going to do? You know, what, for example, so let's just start with the police. I read their memo, and I know the police chief is taking a, well, let's see what happens attitude. I know on other projects, for example, we've had applicants that have designated specific funds for new police officers or new equipment. I don't see any in this case. So, you know, what are we going to do if something goes horribly wrong in terms of the police details? And I guess secondly, what I would say to that is, you know, if things go wrong from a traffic standpoint, do we have the ability to change the hours of operation? And the reason I bring that up is, of course, there's a lot of stories about how, you know, there's been delays in getting changes made at different sites. I would think, again, we need to, you know, take immediate action. So I guess my question is, are we building any contingencies in for changing the hours of operation? So maybe those are too open-ended, but, you know, what are police going to do, and what are we going to do about hours of operation, and how fast can we implement changes?
Obviously, it's something that the applicant will have to demonstrate. In similar projects, there have been conditions placed in where the applicant does reporting that is provided back to the department. So we do see that post-certificate of occupancy and post-building. If it turns into a dire situation, there could be conditions placed where the applicant does come back before the planning board and something is figured out. In terms of hours of operation, you know, if it's a matter during the peak hour, you know, and we can identify, you know, during these certain hours, maybe there could be some place guards put in to where it limits the amount of people coming in. Maybe it's drive-throughs closed or things of that nature. There have been prior approvals by the planning board for certain fast food users, and I would point to Dunkin' Donuts, which required an express menu, and that's the Dunkin' Donuts on the corner of Hancock Street and Washington Street, I believe, where they do have an express menu, but there could be conditions and place guards put in where the applicant does provide reporting back to the department and the planning board, demonstrating that the traffic that they're bringing is either at or below or in excess of what they proposed. And if it's in excess, then the conditions that will be placed will require them to come back to the planning board and provide either further mitigation or create a larger discussion at that point.
Okay. Again, I think part of our responsibility is to look at the worst-case scenario. And, you know, there's a lot of challenges with this site and with the traffic, and we have to have the ability to react quickly, because, you know, if it goes bad the first day, what if it goes bad the second day? You know, I'm not trying to be doomsday about this, but I'm just trying to, you know, look at it very carefully. And I know everybody's put in a lot of stuff about, you know, work on the traffic, and we're making a lot of assumptions. These are models after all, but we don't know. And if reality sets in, and we got to, as one of the residents says, have a plan B. So things that come to my mind are police and hours of operation, and we have to be able to act fast. So.
If I may, Madam Chair, just add to Connor's comments on sort of how that would go down. In this particular instance, I think we would also, if the board is inclined to move forward and support this, that we would give an extra level of, I don't know the term I want to use, to the police chief in his discretion. Right? Because a situation arises, Mr. Dirk's going to have to get out there and do his counts. You know, this is not going to be just have chaos for 45 days while Jeff does what he needs to do and the planning board figures out what they're going to do and Jeff's solution and et cetera, that the police chief, if it raises to a level of detriment and the concern of public safety, then the police chief would need, we would write in something into the decision that he would have the ability to do something within his duty to correct the situation immediately, because again, there needs to be some investigation work. Then there could be a single movement that's causing the problem. There might be multiple movements. There could be a variety of different things that contribute to a potential issue. In determining that, studying that, and coming up with solutions, well, we're not going to, again, have mayhem going on while we're all here in the conference room figuring out what to do about it. So there will be exhaustive conditions, and Mr. Lucas has offered to work with us on crafting those, making sure we're using, we've got some pretty good ones that I think Jeff might have reviewed 10 years ago or so, but we're constantly updating those and constantly making sure that we are capturing any opportunity that could come out of a traffic situation that really puts the planning board in the driver's seat.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Member McCamey. And I guess on that point, as I understand the staff report, one of the questions tonight for the planning board is our comfort level with having draft conditions put into place. So I'll most likely after the public hearing or after the public get a chance to talk and the rest of the questions, come back around and get people's thoughts on that. But for now, feel free to point out that feelings on that or stick with whatever questions you have at this point. But I'll turn to Member Kent.
Picking up where Member McCamey left off, I'd like to focus on Table 9R.
in the staff report.
Okay, so generally, how is this put together? But you're taking trips from comps, local comp, other Chick-fil-A franchises?
For the Chick-fil-A use, yes. We also, I know we're focused a lot on the Chick-fil-A, and for the bank is industry
Okay.
standard. Yes,
Okay.
but for the Chick-fil-A use, yes, we looked at several comparable sites in the eastern Massachusetts and used those numbers to develop the traffic numbers for the Chick-fil-A.
So there would be a range of
Yes.
within
yes.
those numbers, so this is a model. So similarly, you know, from day to day in the week, is Friday heavier than Monday? You know, we're talking about a weekday evening. You know, there's ranges within the days of the week as
Correct.
well that have been sort of averaged into this?
What we analyze is it's always an average condition is what we're looking at. So when we're measuring volumes, Saturday's a Saturday, obviously, it's Tuesday to Thursday, and that's when we look at traffic volumes. We also look at, you know, generally average conditions as it relates to what the uses would generate. So we don't typically count on Fridays or Mondays because they tend to be either lower or higher than what a typical condition would be. So we would consider it average is what I would look at.
Okay, and then when we say weekday evening, you know, if it's 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. or 5 p.m. to 6 p.m., there would be quite a range within those as well, I would think.
Exactly, but when we're looking at the analysis, what we're looking at is the highest volume on the roadway and then the highest volume of traffic generated by the site, and we add those two together. So if you slid 15 minutes on either side, the volumes are going to be lower than what we've analyzed. So you're right, within that time period, similar to what we were talking about with the traffic signal, there's variations that would happen, but what our attempt to analyze is like the peak of the peak, that's what we're trying to analyze. And the other thing I would mention is we're looking 7 years in the future, so we've also inflated the volumes as well. So all of what we're talking about, when the Chick-fil-A opens, the traffic volumes on the roadway won't be what we've estimated in the traffic study. The analysis of impacts won't be what we've estimated because what we've estimated is inflated volumes 7 years in the future, not what's going to happen when the project actually opens. So, I hate to say that what it does is it creates a buffer for us so that what we're hoping for, and I think what some of the questions from the board is that we don't have these conditions when we open because we're planning for 7 years in the future, and when they open, those conditions aren't there. So it does allow some time for this to settle out.
Okay, so it's important that this is, not the best case scenario. If anything, it's more conservative.
Correct.
Based on the data that's been accumulated.
Exactly, yes. I would really describe it as it relates to when this restaurant will open, they're inflated on the high side numbers. These will not be the volumes that will be there or operationally when the restaurant opens because it's inflated volume 7 years in the future. So, really the goal is to the extent that there's an issue, if it arises today, it gets fixed. And so we won't have these conditions as it projects out to the future because we plan for higher volumes than we're actually going to be there.
Okay, I think that's important to get that out.
It is, yes.
Thank you. Okay. All set.
Thank you. Member Grove.
Yes, ma'am. I concur with Member McCamey that the project is going to live and die with the traffic. And we can't let any of it fall through the cracks. We've got to be on top of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Grove. Member Conley?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to thank the police department for their comments related to the bank use and our staff for the follow-up. I also wanted to note that there has been improvement in the site conditions, so thank you to the development team for that. I did have some questions related to what the proposed construction timeline is. Could you remind us of that, please?
Yes, Pete Doucette, Torrington Properties. So the plan for the project would be post-approval and, an appeal period. We've already abated the building, so we've invested that. So the abatement, which was about a 3-month project, happened last spring. Demo would start immediately. It's about a 12-month duration. So we have about a month of demo, about 3 to 4 months of prepping the site. So these are pad-ready sites. They're ground leases. So we prepare the site. That's about 4 months. So say 4 to 5 months in, our 2 tenants, Chick-fil-A and Brookline Bank, would come in and build their buildings concurrently. And both of them have essentially construction documents done and ready to go. While all of that's happening, we will be managing, a high-level off-site mitigation project, a Charles Contracting or some type of qualified contractor. We'd be managing that piece of the work concurrently so that when the buildings come to completion, the traffic improvements would also come to completion. So we're looking at about a year. The goal would be to open these buildings at the end of -- first of 2025.
And is there a plan in terms of phasing the openings between the 2 tenants?
There could be. I mean, at the moment, I think both of them are anxious to get going and try to get their business operational. But I think, just based on some of the hours of operation, the bank is a little bit different and their peak hours are a little bit different than Chick-fil-A. So I think that's one of the reasons we went with these 2 tenants, is they complement each other in that way. Neither are open on Sunday. So, that's, and I think for the most part, the bank said that they're only open from 8 to 12 on Saturday. So that helps the Saturday, afternoon, evening rushes. So, but we could discuss that with them. I think they're both anxious to get in and probably get in at the same time. But
All right, thank you.
yes.
And then I wanted to reiterate the conditions to remedy any possible traffic issues. I think that's important to have that be at the discretion of the police chief, and it allows for more immediate action. Thank you.
I could just add on that very quickly, Madam Chair. I think there's going to be 2 pieces to that. It's the fail-safe is the police chief has discretion. The other thing is the monitoring program. And we've spent a lot of time getting to this point addressing Article 14, but one of the things we haven't done is that monitoring provision. I would say the monitoring provision for this site, it's going to be robust anyways, but because we need to file with Mass DOT, and your consultant can confirm this, the monitoring program is going to be probably even more robust than what you would typically see. And what I think we would do is it makes sense to have the same monitoring condition that MassDOT's going to require as a part of this, and it lasts 5 years. So it's usually a carrot and stick approach, which is the monitoring is we'll work with staff to develop what the metrics are, but it's going to be, annually, at least annually for a 5-year period. And then what it has to have per MassDOT is not only what you're going to monitor, but it has to very specifically specify the what-ifs. To the extent that these exceedances are measured as a result of the monitoring, you have to do these things. So the monitoring, unlike what you may have seen before, is going to say, these are all the things the applicant will undertake to the extent that there's an exceedance. But the fail-safe is the separate condition related to the police chief, that is independent of the monitoring. But I think that's one of the things that we haven't worked on yet, and it'll be, after I think you direct staff to work on that, we would assist with putting that together. But it will be a robust MassDOT required monitoring because they're going to put that in place on the project. So it might as well be the same report delivered to the town.
I had a follow-up question. At what point do you consider it to be a return to normal use? So there's anticipation of the restaurant opening, and then when do you consider yourself to be in normal times?
I think what it would be is when the volume stabilized, so that what we would be seeing is the same amount of traffic on a reoccurring basis. I think is when we'll see stabilization. So that typically, as it relates to monitoring, for any project, we usually say it's, somewhere for residential, it might be 3 months, but we usually say 6 months. 6 months is a reasonable time period to allow for the variations to settle out. Because the other thing that happens with any retail uses, they have the soft opening, which is to get staff familiar with how the site operates, bring some customers in. But then once it's open and fully operational, they're changing things. And so you need to let that steady state kind of settle out, get everyone familiar with how the restaurant operates. And I think that goes back to having a plan in place for opening. And then I think it'll really take about 6 months for things to settle out, stabilize. And then the monitoring, I think the monitoring usually will occur sooner, because one of the things is you want to catch anything immediately to see if we have to retime the signal or do anything, do that, and then maybe monitor again, within that 6 month time period. And then to the extent that settles out, then it's annually. If you see things settle out, then you do the annual monitoring.
And when you look historically at Chick-fil-A sites, do you see a greater jump there compared to other restaurants from what was projected to what you're seeing in monitoring?
Not typically. What I would say is typically what we see with monitoring is that we're over-designed. The only time that we would see that there would be, a variation would be something where if we monitor really soon. So, within a week of opening, if you were doing monitoring then, you might see an exceedance of some of the projections. Again, it may have more to do with letting the site settle out. But we generally don't see volumes that exceed what we've estimated in the traffic study. We try to overestimate.
And then this may be a question for you, it may be a question for the Chick-fil-A team, but what are their protocols in terms of trying to reduce traffic within that launch, but then also during operations?
Yeah, I think that'll be operational. Yep.
Thank you.
Good evening. Joey Fonseca with Bowler. I can answer some of the grand opening questions. So, like all restaurants that Chick-fil-A opens, they hire a grand opening team that consists of 20-plus employees, in addition to the operator staff that staffs about over 100 employees and trains them. The grand opening team is specifically integrated into the police department, the fire department, local staff, planning board, whoever else is involved in that. They work closely with them to develop a traffic plan so that they'll know where the cars are going to be stacked on site during, the first 6 to 8 weeks is typically when you've got your sort of your peak, your excitement that there's a new store open. That's typically what Chick-fil-A has been seeing. So they'll be integrated into that design and to make sure that everyone in the city is aware, and the town is aware of where they're showing their queue patterns. This site is a little bit more unique. We've got a large queue stack on this site, which is way more than any other site in Mass today. So a lot of times you've got sites that are in plazas and you've got, you're dealing with other roadways and third party and other tenants. In this case, you're able to queue a lot of it on site. So what they're going to be working with police and fire are, in the event of queuing that go beyond into the parking aisles, what goes on from there. So they will develop that. That starts about a month before a grand opening. They'll start interacting with the local police and fire just to make sure that everyone's on board and everyone has a plan ready for the grand opening. And they're there to support the operator and the team during that time. So as Jeff was saying, as the store opens, there may be some issues. The grand opening team is there to help facilitate that and quickly get their efficiency up during that time.
And is that a team that travels with that specific purpose?
Correct. Okay. Yep.
And then just as a comparison, if you're familiar with the Plymouth location, is this like about 2 times the queuing capacity?
The Plymouth has a long queue. Tough to say off the top of my head, but Plymouth does have a pretty lengthy queue stack there that's isolated as well. I'm not sure if it's as long as this stack, but the other one that's close by, Hanover, has it's probably a third of this stack. But I think it's close. In Plymouth, this one might be a little bit longer of a stack, certainly internal to the parking area as well.
Okay, this is helpful. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate your comments tonight, sir. I was concerned about something. The stacking plan is this plan that we're approving. There won't be any extra stacking. There will not be a single car if somebody comes by, the cops are gonna go, goodbye.
Correct.
So I don't, there's no interim plan. This is the plan.
Correct.
So I just want to be clear that don't come with, oh, we're going to do this for a week, or, because the answer is you're not doing that. If you can't fit, if this doesn't work, then there's bigger problems.
Correct. It's more of a
Okay.
general comment regarding just the stacking internal to the site, so.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear
Sure.
that there will be no option to stack in Ivory or anywhere outside of the site ever.
No,
Okay.
that is definitely not their plan, right?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And actually, while you're up there, I have a question on the internal part also. The way I understand Hanover, one of the upgrades that was done was doing the walkout service and order taking as opposed to the window only to try to accommodate some of the car movements on the site. Is that something that's already being proposed here or can be proposed?
That is the current model for all Chick-fil-A restaurants. So Hanover was prior to the current prototype, so they did do the upgrades to the Tormax door and the double entrance into the drive-through, and they did some additional stacking into the parking lot as well. But the current proto is team members are out during peak times taking orders, taking payment and delivering meals out there, and that plan dramatically increases the efficiency of their drive-through, and certainly that during their grand opening times, that increases the drive-through capacity of the queue stack as well. So that will be implemented here. That's on all Chick-fil-A's. Most locations have already been upgraded to that new prototype, existing and new construction.
Okay, thank you. And Member Conley, did you have any other questions before?
No, I've completed my questions. Thank
Okay, all right, thank you.
Member Conley, I did just want to clarify one thing on the schedule. So it's, the timeline that I gave you is based on the assumption that we're working concurrently while DOT handles their permit. So that's a process that it takes some time. That would all get pushed back if for some reason this was all happening post that. But I think the idea is that there'd be a condition that would need to all be done prior to a CO. But that was the timeline's based on that stuff happening concurrently, MEPA and DOT.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
Question, comment, and that's about, just like in general, about the bank, and thinking about the bank and what does the bank add. In my opinion, it adds vehicle trips. And I was just curious if the bank is this a hard and fast with the bank, or can the bank just, I was thinking about this earlier, and then Member Conley's question about phasing. I'm just not sure what benefit the bank is really gonna provide to the community. I didn't realize they had so many locations. They have no South Shore locations, so looks like maybe they're trying to get a name down here on the South Shore and attract a customer base, which you can't blame them for wanting to do that. But just looking at the numbers and looking at Table 4 and what the bank adds from a trip generation perspective, and that it seems like the Saturday mid-peak is really the peakest period for the bank, which was also the 3 periods when the volumes went over the 10%. So just looking at the numbers and just trying to understand as the town moves forward and the board thinks about this. I mean, I think everybody wants it to be successful and wants Chick-fil-A to be successful, but wants the community to be a win is also from that perspective. And again, I got nothing against banks. It's just the bank doesn't really do much of anything it's not like we need a bank in the community. Nobody says, oh my God, we're gonna get a bank there, you know what I mean? I mean, Chick-fil-A is something that people probably love to, or hate to love, or love to hate, or whatever it is. But just, again, kind of thinking out loud and talking out loud, I don't know if the bank is a hard and fast, or if that's something that, frankly, can just be eliminated from the plan altogether. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'll the applicant team wants to answer that. I have a couple other questions, but I can.
I think probably Jeff would be the most informative, but as Jeff has pointed out, with the 7-year forecast, these are very conservative analysis, and I have some experience with banks, serve on a board, and so much is done digitally, so we don't know if those vehicle trips are probably very conservatively stated as compared to the number of people that will actually go to the bank. So, you know, Jeff can probably address that more, but it is certainly something I think that Pete can address too. But you know, it's a reasonable tenant. It's a low generator comparatively, and it's relied upon to make the economics work.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that goes into my first question for Mr. Dirk with respect to the traffic counts. It's been a while since we talked about the counts themselves, and I guess I just wanted to confirm, because this is a little bit of what Member Kent had asked also. So the traffic counts for Chick-fil-A, the ones used in the models were actually more, the ones used in this report, your analysis, were actually more than what the models say for a drive-through, because they were increased in response to the peer review based on Chick-fil-A, right?
Correct, that's exactly. We did not use ITE numbers for a fast food restaurant with a drive-through. We used the actual measured volumes at several stores.
Okay. And when we talk about sort of a worst-case scenario, the traffic analysis also didn't account for any prior trips from the Motel 6 because it's been closed for so long.
That's correct.
Okay. And then with the bank, are those based on the model numbers, and how long have those model numbers been around, to Attorney Marinelli's point about bank practices these days?
So the latest update was published in 2011, so it's, you know, it is current, I'm sorry, it's current data. It's the 11th edition of the Trip Generation Manual, so it's the current version. Let's make sure I've got the date. So it's well over 50 years worth of data that's been published. And I'll just get you the exact date. So it's 2021.
I'm sorry, what was it?
The latest edition of Trip Generation, it was published in 2021, so it would be current practices.
Current numbers.
And I would mention that data is pre-COVID data as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And what else? We had talked a little bit with the pedestrian crossing at Ivory and Union, and you had mentioned at one point a flashing light for pedestrians that could potentially be included. I didn't know if that was included or if that was part of, if that was something different, if you could go through that again.
Sure. So what we had talked about was because when we have these concurrent movements happening, one of the things we talked about was a dynamic sign that would say, like, no turn on red when the pedestrian push button. So that is something that can be added into the signal phasing or into the signal system, so that in that instance, if no pedestrian pushes the push button, it just allows those right turns to happen. But if a pedestrian pushes the push button, there's a blank outside or a fiber optic sign that comes on that says no turn on red. When a pedestrian's there. So that's something that can be incorporated into the signal system and active when a pedestrian pushes the push button.
Okay, and then that's something different than just making it always no turn on.
Exactly. It would allow no turns on red to occur, would allow for right turns on red to occur, except in the instance when there's a pedestrian crossing, in which case the sign would come on and light up saying there's a pedestrian, basically no turn on red because there's a pedestrian crossing. So that's an option that can be added into the signal system.
Okay. All right, thank you. What else? I had one more question on the sidewalk. Oh, the sidewalk extension. I know there were some comments on that requires coordination with the town because it goes over the town property. I just wanted to see if you could explain how that typically works. Like the process of understanding the sidewalk and getting whatever approvals are required.
So I think it's really, it's not uncommon. It's similar to if a sidewalk's on private property where there's an easement granted for that to take place. So I think in this place, it's really, we just need, for the developer to construct the sidewalk, we would need permission to enter upon town property, construct the sidewalk. And then I think to the extent that it's let's say a different town entity that may own the sidewalk, they would need to grant an easement to allow for the sidewalk to be constructed on that property. So it's really about, I think, the town granting easements to allow for this work to take place.
Okay. All right, thank you. I think that's my only question. I also appreciate the significant amount of additional information that was presented and the explanation of how it all works together. I think all of us agree that the traffic is the biggest question in this, and trying to understand what that means and what our concerns are. I guess at this point, this is a public hearing. I'll ask if there's any public that would like to comment, and if you want to come up and just give your name and address.
Good evening. For the record, my name's Bob Durgan. I live at Totnes Road here in Braintree. I'm the gentleman that asked about Plan B a couple times now, and to be honest, I don't think we have a Plan A that works. Having people go down and take a U-turn in front of masses of people that are getting off the T, or sending 100% of the people who exit the Chick-fil-A and the bank have to go back around the Rotary, and you're going to tell me this isn't going to impact traffic for 7 years? It's already impacted. And the idea to take time from across where we just put Burlington Coat Factory, Amazon Fresh, and now with the who knows what's going to go in that area, it's not going to work. And I'll tell you, it's interesting how this process has evolved, because some of the previous speakers got up here and said I believe it was 650 plants, and how nice and what an improvement it was going to be. And now they're talking about case law and lawsuits. Let me tell you what's happened around the country if you haven't read. When Chick-fil-A doesn't get their way, if you think the police, maybe the police, but if you think they're going to change after their hair, they're talking about lawsuits now. Towns have had to sue them to get them to change. And this area doesn't have anywhere to go. There's no Plan B. We just look around the country and see what a traffic nightmare. I can just imagine people that are in the front row behind me sitting at towns across the country convincing boards with numbers that they weren't going to have a traffic problem, and now they do. And years later, they haven't fixed it. Just do a little research on that. I mean, we hear a lot about right of use. What about the right to come up with a plan that keeps the people in this town safe when they put this traffic nightmare in there? I just hope that you really consider what we're getting into here, because this plan in that area, the other Chick-fil-A's have back ways out. You go to Hanover, there's a back way out. There's no other Chick-fil-A of fast food right next to the major Rotary with no other way in or out. I appreciate all your time. Thank you. Everybody have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, members of the board. My name is Meredith Baraka. I'm the District 5 Town Councilor representing the district in which this project is being proposed. And I want to echo Mr. Durgan's sentiment to thank you all for the time and thoughtfulness that has gone into multiple public hearings on this. I've been before this board 2 previous times on this matter, and tonight I just want to offer some suggestions and comments on some of this evening's proposals. And I'd like to point out first, one of the traffic mitigation measures, transportation demand management that was offered by the proponent, I believe is lacking in tangible benefits to the community. And I want to read some of those out for residents who may not have had a time to read all of the information. So to manage traffic for their employees, they're offering a welcome packet that will be provided to employees to let them know about public transportation services and biking and walking alternatives. They are offering an information packet regarding public transportation services, maps, schedules, and fares. They are encouraging their tenants, so Chick-fil-A and the bank, to have a microwave in the break room, a refrigerator in the break room, dry cleaning services, and other such things that they're expecting their employees to take advantage of and reduce the traffic in the area. At a bare minimum, I think these are things that employees are expecting anyway, and I would offer that a more tangible benefit would be for these tenants to purchase and pay for MBTA passes for their employees. We're trying to reduce traffic and emissions in this part of town, and to offer microwaves and refrigerators in a break room as traffic management, I think, falls far short. The second point I'd like to make, based on the information that came up this evening, is Pearl and Ivory Street intersection that is being impacted, has been on the town's to-do list for years for improvement. And with a noted impact to this intersection with this project, I would strongly recommend or suggest that at a bare minimum, the redesign be integrated with our town's DPW and complete streets policy, so that beyond signal timing, we're getting more out of this developer for the impacts on the broader intersections outside of this area. And then lastly and thirdly, I understand that a sidewalk has been proposed on the Ivory Street side, which is an improvement, but I would like to understand why the shared use path, which is part of our Ivory Street corridor plan, was not implemented or suggested to be implemented. And again, a sidewalk is better than no sidewalk, but I don't think it's as good as we could ask for or get from a shared use path and begin that bike path extension to make Ivory Street truly bike and pedestrian friendly. Again, I want to thank the board for its time and consideration.
Thank you. All right, and I know that the question of the shared use path came up before, and I think I remember it being explained it's on the other side of Ivory Street, but if maybe somebody from the applicant team could speak to that question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, Jeffrey Dirk. That is correct. It would be on the MBTA side because similar to, I think, the question you asked about how would we facilitate construction of the sidewalk on the Ivory Street side, there's not enough room over there to do the shared use path. It would need to be 10 feet wide as a shared use pathway at a minimum. And then so the only place that really fits within the standpoint of right-of-way is on the MBTA side. And then I know we've had some conversation about the landscaping, and I think you can see all the street trees that are there. So it was something that, from the standpoint of this project and what we're trying to achieve, in working with staff, was really sidewalks on both sides, which allowed for the connectivity to take place, but to the extent that the town were to advance a shared use path, that would happen on the MBTA side, and I think we've committed to designing the intersection improvements in such a way that a shared use path could connect up to the signalized intersection with widened sidewalks and curb ramps that would need to be there to accommodate that. So we're going to design for it at the intersection. It would happen on the MBTA side.
Okay, and with the, Director, with the proposed new U-turn, limit any ability to add the shared use path or the sidewalk, or do any of these suggested improvements make it more difficult, more expensive, or anything along those lines?
They do not preclude the construction of the shared use path. I would say that the improvements at the intersection will save money if when we build the intersection, we build in the ability to just link it right up to the new sidewalk that we're going to construct on the southwest corner. So that would actually save money if we design the signal and build it in such a way that you just connect into it.
Okay. And Director Santucci-Razzi, did you have another question on that?
Again, thinking out loud here. To Mr. Dirk, we can't fit a sidewalk in a multi-use, correct?
No, you'd put them together.
We have the multi-use only on one side.
Right.
And then essentially the entire roadway would be realigned, or?
I don't think you,
And would we lose the median, the green?
I think you would need to build it entirely on the MBTA side. So where you see basically the trees and everything that's here, you're going to end up taking the trees down and pushing it that way, because I think that's the only way you're going to fit that in there. You could not realign Ivory Street in this area because you're too close to the intersection. You've got basically fixed points with the signals on either side, so you can't make any changes in the middle there. So you'd end up widening you basically cut into the green space on the MBTA side to get the shared use path in place.
And would that be something that that the alternatives could be designed while you're looking at the sidewalk, just so we could understand? I guess it's sort of a two-part question, is, whether the applicant would pay for the shared use path, or the other question, that whether the actual design putting into place any of these upgrades would make that more problematic to be able to understand that better while the sidewalk's being reviewed for the opposite side. I'm not sure if that question came across particularly clear, but.
So I think it's really, there's nothing that we're doing here that precludes the ability to construct the shared use path, because the curb-to-curb width isn't going to change. What you'd be doing is doing work on the MBTA side, but it would occur outside of the traveled way. Because basically the lanes they're minimums already, so we couldn't take away any lane width, and we couldn't drop a lane just because of the volume of traffic. So what you'd be talking about is really just doing work outside of the curb area on the MBTA side. So there's nothing that we're doing that would preclude the ability to construct the shared use path. However, when we're constructing this corner of the intersection, we can design it in such a way so that the shared use path would come into where the crossing is here in the signalized intersection. Because otherwise you would need to rebuild that corner to accommodate the connection for the shared use path.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
As you leave the Ivory Union intersection and you travel south on Ivory, there's a retaining wall on the back of the sidewalk. So, does that get pushed back into the T property? It looks like in some spaces there might be some room. Sorry, Bill. There are some grade issues on that side of the street, and whether or not, you would essentially, now we have the sidewalk, and then we have the green area, and then you have the driveway on the T property that takes you into the garage. You would essentially likely lose all of that green space, if not, I'm having a hard time seeing how 10 feet would fit in there, but. And then Connor, yep.
Actually worked with our engineering department at the beginning of the month and asked them to provide the road layout for Ivory Street to the applicant team. The back sidewalk on the MBTA side is actually the property line, so that's where the road layout technically ends. So we would not only need an easement from the MBTA, but we'd be further pushing onto the city property there. Then on the other side, on the landfill side, where the fence is for the park in the landfill, it's about 5 feet from the edge of the roadway, and that there is the property line. So the street in itself, in the drawings we received, is about 80 feet in length. So constructing, a shared use path on either side does pose certain challenges.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess at this point, sorry, go ahead.
For staff, is the satellite lot, is that a permanent lot, or is that temporary related to construction?
The one at the people's parking lot?
The closest to the landfill.
That's Braintree temporary, so 5 to 25 years. No,
Okay.
seriously. The T keeps adding projects, I guess, to the garage. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. I couldn't answer that question. We can find out, though.
Okay, and then as follow-up to Councilor Barrica's questions about encouraging staff to potentially bike to work within buildings, a lot of times that you would include like a shower room so that if you were to bike to work, that you had that option.
Yes, and I through the chair to Member Conley and Councilor's comments as well. Again, if the board is supportive of this and directs the staff to do draft conditions, we will be putting together some different TDM requirements. We recently did some TDM requirements on the special permit for the parking reduction down the landing, so we can use that as a model. I think there's some more things that they can do, and then it's, you know, not to make fun of any situations, but, you know, it's to talk about TDM on a drive-through use is just a little bit, and I don't think anybody should expect the same level of sort of receptiveness and things that you would get, and there's a lot of very large companies and, you know, in the city, Cambridge, and different communities that put together very vigorous TDM plans that those areas are in biking networks. I've heard Quincy is very dangerous to bike. I don't know anything about Weymouth, but I've been on Route 18 and it's not even really safe to drive. And then we know what Braintree is like to bike in. So what comes first, the lane or the bike? I think there's certain areas where people are really going to take advantage of biking infrastructure and they're going to bike to work. Is that going to happen here? I'm not sure, but I think there's some things where we can get more creative and try to incentivize use of the red line. I think that's something that is definitely something that can be expanded upon and successful.
Thank you.
All right. So I guess I'll get planning board member feedback on the question about where we go from here and what our comfort level is with the conditions. Attorney Marinelli, do you have anything to add before we sort of go to that discussion, or just?
Yes, we would welcome the opportunity to work on some of the things that Melissa talked about in drafting the conditions and assisting where we can. MBTA passes, as mentioned by Councilor Berkey. Some of these, well, let's start from the beginning, which is the abhorrent condition of the property has existed for far too long. And that preceded Torrington's purchase of the property in 2022. So, you know, this is an opportunity for the town in terms of having an owner that is capable of doing the investment that is proposed here. And Chick-fil-A, I think, is a great corporate citizen in terms of everything that they would do and the participation that they would bring. We have talked in our presentation, and the studies have gone on for months. The peer review, the responses, as testified by Mr. Lucas tonight, that they're in agreement with the things that Jeff had presented. Those were the words. So we would like the opportunity to move forward. The community wants to move forward. I mean, this has existed for far too long down at Motel 6. And the history of the whole site, we're all familiar with it. Those of us who have lived here all my life know of the incidents, et cetera. This is a tremendous improvement and opportunity to have even the existing issues at the intersection addressed. Like Jeff talked about the dynamics of what goes on, the reallocation of timing in answer to Mr. McCamey's questions. These are all technologically superior advancements to the intersection. So we would like to move ahead with the ability to have conditions for the next meeting, or at least to start to discuss those conditions and a draft at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Marinelli. I guess I'll ask first, Member McCamey, if you have any additional thoughts you want to add.
I don't think so at this moment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Member Kent? Member Grove?
No, ma'am.
Member Conley?
I had a question for staff. Do you think we're at the point where the transition is to drafting conditions?
I'm going to jump in here. You know, we have got a lot of information. Connor has been going back and forth along with our peer review here. We're on a fourth letter from Mr. Diaz. We're on probably a fourth or fifth from Greg. This last piece here of information that had come in from Mr. Dirk on really putting light on the level of service analysis as well as the increase over the allowable thresholds for the ADTs. Those were really the last two pieces of information. And, you know, from the staff's perspective, we're at a point where we either work towards something positive or we work towards something negative, to be completely blunt. I don't think there's any other more information that can be provided. I think that there will be a Melissa and Connor twist on some of the things that they said that they're going to do, and we will talk to them about those and perfect those and coordinate with the town engineer as well, especially on the traffic mitigation piece and Mr. Lucas. I think it's time. I do. I think it's time, and we need direction from the board so that we understand where the board's coming from, so we can put together a document that reflects the desires and the movement that the board would like to move in. Yeah, I think we're, you know, we did have some continuances because we were working on some information and whatnot, but, you know, we've got a lot of information and a lot of not only just the information, but that extra level of explanation, which has really provided a lot of clarity, I know, for myself and for Connor too, because it's a great location, but it definitely has some drawbacks, and whether or not the planning board feels as though the package as a whole, and that comes with improvements and also things that are not improved, the investment in the site, the off-site mitigation, whether or not they feel as though that is something that is acceptable and meets the site plan criteria. And that's really where we're at.
Thank you.
And just a question for clarity. Your critique of the bank use, was that for bank use or any secondary use at that site?
I was looking, primarily my comment was related to the traffic volumes, and again, looking at sort of when does the bank peak, what kind of trip gen in general does it put out, and then looking at sort of some of those level of service changes that were not positive and some of the increases above the allowable thresholds and how the bank numbers, you know, I think one of the Saturday peaks was 53 trips over the allowable threshold. So, well, the bank produces 66 trips in the afternoon peak on a Saturday. So it's interesting because that's a question. Does the planning board feel as though the bank is the bank a deal breaker? Does the bank push it over? Do those numbers, you know, if we start subtracting out the bank volume, then that would get it into a situation where we might not even be having this discussion because they would meet every section of the criteria of the bylaw, and we really wouldn't be having this discussion. Again, Frank has gone into detail about the use by right and has presented his case and has documented the record as you would expect him to do so. And all their consultants have done the same. And these are questions that, again, the planning board has the authority here. I feel as though the only thing that's really in play is traffic, and it's not the only thing, it is the thing and the planning board needs to provide us some direction on. We've gotten multiple reports. We've gotten follow-up on that. We have our peer review working with us as well. And again, I think he kind of, dotted the I and crossed the T on, lose a little, gain a little, get a new site, get $1 million plus in mitigation in the intersection, get a whole new you got to kind of look at that and say, is this something that I can support and I can get behind? And I know that's a big question, but that's what you're appointed to volunteer your time to do. So, yeah, we do really need I really don't think, and I don't want to speak for Connor, that I don't think there's any more information that we can really get out of these. Obviously, finalizing the drainage thing, which, as Mr. Diaz explained it, you just kind of level off that peak and things start to flow a little bit better and take care of the mounding and the pipe and I mean, that's minor details in the big picture. So that's where Connor's at, and that's where I'm at as the department. It's time to make a move, and we need some direction.
Thank you. Member Conley, anything else you want to add right now?
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks. And I'll say on my end is I have really struggled with this application. It is a lot of traffic being generated, and particularly when it came in and got opened the same night as the housing proposal at the mall, which had significantly less traffic generation than this one does. But I've thought a lot about it, and I've thought about both the plan B for what if the traffic doesn't turn out the way that we're expecting based on the reports and the assumptions and all the different things that have been looked at. But I've also thought about what's the plan B if it doesn't get built the way it's being proposed, and where does that leave us? And it is a tough site. It's about 2 acres. There's one way in and out. It's next to a dump and currently a transfer station for as long as that stays in. And although it would be a great site for a housing that connects with the train station and all the different aspects of it, it's not my site, it's not the town site, it's an owner site who bought it in 2022 and has put a lot of time and effort into coming up with plans and proposed mitigation. And I'm still quite nervous about what happens after they open. I've tried to do as much thinking and talking to people as I can to try to come up with what the right answer is for the community, what the right answer is legally. I think I agree with Attorney Marinelli's recitation of the various cases. It's an as-of-right use. They have a right to use it. In my opinion, they've really gone above and beyond and going back with comments by using the Chick-fil-A traffic as opposed to the standard drive-through traffic to be able to give us a picture of what this looks like. And I think that it looks like it's not great, but I think that it looks like it is what it is. It's a tough intersection. And one of the people I was talking to said, even though you have these concerns with some of the pedestrian crossings and everything else, you have to be careful not to let perfect get in the way of improvements. And I do think that having this site here will be an improvement over a dilapidated Motel 6. And I'm concerned that if we don't go forward on this, that we end up with a dilapidated Motel 6 for another 6 years, 10 years. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what other uses come through. So from my perspective, I'm leaning towards asking staff to put together draft conditions based on a lot of what we've talked about, a lot of what Member McCamey had a lot of very good points about the follow-up traffic monitoring and the different fail-safes and provisions that we should be considering or taking a look at if the traffic generation turns out to be something more than what we're expecting it to be, and what that looks like from crash data and different impacts on the assumptions. But that's my thought on it as far as all the information that we've received. So I guess if there's nothing else to add, do we need a formal, I guess you probably need a vote on what you do on the report, or do you want like a straw vote or
I mean,
feedback from
again,
each member?
you know, this is going to be a very, it's going to be a very voluminous decision with, you know, a lot of different conditions and caveats and statements about site plan review. You know, we want to be working on what the board wants us to work on. So, you know, I'm not looking for a straw vote, but I'm looking for, let's do it as a motion then. Motion to direct the staff to draft conditions. And I need the board to understand that, and I'm sure that you all do, that, again, we need to be working in unison, not the staff working on one thing and the board having a different opinion. I don't want to put anybody on the spot or make anybody feel uncomfortable, but you know, I think I think there's an opportunity here for collaboration, and I think that's only fair to the applicant. You know, depending on how the board feels, you know, they might have some different suggestions or pivot. I'm not sure. But if we're going to embark on a, you know, 30-page decision, I'll leave it at that.
Madam Chair, I would just simply add, for as long as I've been on the planning board, we have never taken a straw vote. We have never taken a motion. We have never said, oh, we'd like to move in this direction. I'm uncomfortable with that because I'd be happy to perhaps share my thoughts with the director, but again, in my tenure, we have never done this. And I'm uncomfortable doing it.
That's fair. We've also never had a project that had this many vehicle trips, so, again, we have very limited staff and extremely difficult to, you know, move forward with 2 people doing the work of 4 people. We have the MBTA hearings, we have our master plan, and we need to be working on things that are going somewhere. Or if they're not going somewhere, we need to be working in that direction as well.
Attorney Marinelli? Yep. One moment.
Jeff burnt out the battery.
It's the official sign we've gone on too long.
Jeff's got to bring his own batteries next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the normal decision is what, 80-plus conditions? Maybe this one will be 120. But we're willing to work with all of the suggestions that have been made. You just can't continue the stagnation that's gone on at this site for over 6 years. It's just untenable. And the uses by right are market-driven, and these are the uses, and these are the tenants. And everything has been answered, and everything has been peer-reviewed. And there's no negative evidence. There's no negative evidence under Wendy's versus Bill Ricker for any other speculation. This can work. Jeff pointed out, and in answer to Mr. Kent's question, that, you know, these are 7 years out, that there's been very conservative analysis that's been built in, as Jeff said, as a buffer. So if there is whatever issues are, I heard discretion in the police chief. We're completely amenable to all of that. We want this to work. The business wants it to work as much as the community does. It's not successful if the business doesn't feel that it can work, and they do feel that it can work. And we feel that with everything that we've presented, the conditions can be drafted. I'm sensitive to the work that they have, but the answer is not just to simply say no or no conditions. I mean, we have to staff things appropriately, and I understand with the budgetary constraints that we've had in this town and the lack of revenue and the lack of growth, and this is a $10 million redevelopment with this use, and the mitigation, the $1 million on the intersection. We need to start thinking about those things and doing those things. And maybe that kind of redevelopment program going forward, rather than the stagnation that we've had, will be able to support the staff and have more people employed in the planning department, so that people just aren't saying, well, we've got 2 people and, you know, we can't do this. We can do this, and we'll help, and we'll discuss conditions that are reasonable and that are robust for the town and for the oversight. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that it is an unusual vote, but I think in the circumstances of where we're at with the extensive amount of information, the fact that we have a MBTA zoning requirement that's supposed to get approved by the end of the year, and we have a lot of work to do with that. And I don't think that any vote tonight on whether or not to draft conditions binds any member to voting for or against the project once the conditions are drafted. So, and I think that if members would rather abstain from the vote, that makes it more difficult for the planning department to figure out where best to go from here, but I think that that is also an option. Can't think of any issues with that. And maybe I'll ask the director if she can think of any issues with that.
No, and again, I appreciate the dialogue, and I appreciate, you know, the comments from Attorney Marinelli. It's creating a record, you know, we're creating a record of concerns, opinions, questions, information, answers, and the record gets to the decision, and whether that's a positive decision or a negative decision. And, you know, I just think we need some direction. We really do. And I don't want to get too into it much more, but we need some direction, Madam Chair, please.
Thank you. I guess with that, I'd be looking for a motion to direct staff to draft conditions, and so a yes vote would be in favor of having staff direct conditions, a no vote would be in favor of not doing that, which, saying another way, would be in anticipation of taking a negative vote on the project. So with that, I'd be looking for a motion to ask staff to draft conditions on this application.
Madam Chairman, I'd make that motion, but I also want it to be clearly understood that the whole project is still dependent on how the conditions come out. So this isn't a vote for the project or against the project.
Yes, I think that's a good clarification. So there was a motion made by Member Grove.
I'll second that.
And a second by Member Kent. So all those in favor of having staff draft conditions, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, so that's, and any opposed?
I abstain.
And one member abstaining, so just for, I guess. 401. Yeah, 401. Thank you. All right, and so next we'll be looking for a motion to continue the hearing to the December 12th.
So moved.
All right, I have a motion by Member Grove.
Second.
And a second by Member Conley. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Nope. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, the board, for your time, and we appreciate all the work that the staff does.
All right. So now we're just looking for a motion to close the meeting tonight.
Motion to adjourn.
All right. Motion to adjourn by Member Grove.
Second.
Lots of seconds. Second by Member Kent. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. All right. Thank you.